Chapter 741, The Inevitable Fate. Despite my interference creating so many changes, how can this battle unfold exactly like how it did in the original story? A deep frown appeared on the face of Fujin's clone. Ever since he stepped into this world, Fujin had been careful not to mess with the story too much. Unfortunately, things hadn't been as he had wished, and his presence inevitably caused several changes. Things had gone so out of hand that Fujin had mentally prepared himself to discard most of his future knowledge. As such, seeing something happen similar to the original story should have been good news to Fujin. However, his clone wasn't happy. On the contrary, his mood was grave. He analyzed, the circumstances here and in the original story were completely different. In the original story, Konoha was shown to be ignorant to the fact that Gaara was a Jinchuriki. Even if I assumed that Hiruzen knew, he hadn't made any arrangements to take care of him. Suna's betrayal had come as a shock to Konoha. However, due to my interference, Konoha was well aware of Suna's treachery and prepared for the war. The higher-ups have long known that Gaara is a Jinchuriki. Hiruzen and Shikaku even assigned Kakashi to take care of him. Yet, despite all the preparations and arrangements, despite the changes caused due to my actions, why have things reached exactly this stage? Fujin's clone saw Naruto creating a dozen shadow clones and using them very creatively to maneuver around Gaara. He used the 1,000 years of death jutsu with one small change. Instead of sticking an explosive tag to his kunai, Naruto used the kunai that was given to him by Fujin when he left his training to Jiraiya. As a result, the explosion was much stronger. Had the circumstances been different, Fujin's clone would have been amused. However, his mind was in a different place. Just a month ago, Fujin had dismissed Neji's thoughts about fate and put his own perspective. However, there was one major difference between Neji and Fujin. Neji's perspective was a result of his traumatic childhood and the arrogance of a genius. Fujin, on the other hand, knew what the future held. He knew that fate played a major role in this world, especially with events involving Naruto and Sasuke. Even so, he hadn't given much importance to it. Fujin believed that once he gained sufficient strength, he could change the future to be extremely advantageous for him. However, what he was witnessing shook his confidence. For the first time since coming into this world, Fujin was forced to take fate seriously. Fujin's clone couldn't help but wonder if fate truly exists and if things will eventually happen just like they did in the original story, then what's the meaning of my existence? Once I make those moves, it should change the future entirely just like when I killed Kabuto. Even the Fourth Great Ninja War will be completely different if it happens at all. However, if fate exists, does it mean that I wouldn't be able to do that? Or could it be that all my actions will prove futile and the end result will be similar to it was this time? Needless to say, Fujin's clone didn't want to believe it. He could gain strength and fight against stronger foes. With Flying Thunder God Jutsu, he wasn't afraid even of beings like Madara as he could always run away. However, what could he do against something as intangible as fate? If he didn't know the future, he wouldn't have cared about it as it would have been pointless. But that wasn't the case. Fujin's clone quickly concluded, I guess I can still chalk this up to a freakish chain of coincidences. Directly blaming fate wouldn't do me any good. I need more information. Apart from Naruto changing Gaara, there is another critical event that is supposed to happen. Hiruzen is supposed to die in this war. If he doesn't, then the changes will be too huge. However, from the memories I just received, the battle is nearly over. Hiruzen should end up living. If fate truly exists, then it means that something strange will happen and he'll die. If that truly happens, then I'll need to reevaluate my situation entirely. Multi-Shadow Clone Jutsu? Infinite Breakthrough Jutsu? After Sasuke softened Naruto's fall and displayed his resolve to die while Naruto and Shikamaru rescue Sakura and leave, Naruto regained his confidence. He immediately created hundreds of shadow clones, which completely surrounded Gaara, who was still in a bad shape due to the explosion. In the blink of an eye, Gaara was bombarded by intense winds from every direction. Orochimaru slammed his hands on the branch he was standing on and said, I didn't want it to end this way, but this is the end. You will die here, Sensei, and Fujin, Jiraiya, and every Konoha ninja here will follow you into the afterlife. Hiruzen's eyes widened in shock as 10 boxes appeared from the branch. Each of them opened, and the faces of the ninjas inside became visible. Hiruzen muttered, Impossible! Up in the sky, Fujin noticed them through the holes in the iron gold dome. His pupils dilated and his eyes widened as he muttered in disbelief. This! He still had such a card left. While the dome blocked the view of most Konoha ninjas, the Hyuga ninjas were able to see what was happening inside the barrier clearly. Without an exception, shock appeared on everyone's face. The 10 reanimated ninjas walked out of the boxes. Some of them muttered, This is weird. How am I alive, Agai? The first Hokage. Their eyes widened as they saw Hashirama and Tabarama attacking Hiruzen. Seeing Hashirama, each one of them panicked without any exception. However, in less than a second, they recalled that they were already dead, and so was Hashirama. One of them said, "So this is the second Hokage Edo Tensei. Hahaha, it looks like someone used it to attack Konoha. That's hilarious." Another replied, "You sure are calm for someone who's being controlled. It looks like this young man is the caster of this jutsu." Most of them didn't recognize Orochimaru, but a few did and were surprised. One of them chuckled and said, "So the snake turned on his village in the end." In the arena, a few ninjas asked, "Hayashi-sama, what's the issue? What is happening inside the barrier? Is Hokage-sama safe?" Despite his vast experience, Hayashi was too stunned to speak. Several others asked similar questions to other Hyuga ninjas, but none of them answered. In the skies, Ryu muttered, 10 new chakras, similar to those 4 dead ones, have appeared. Fujin, do you recognize them?" Fujin replied, "Yeah, each one of them is terrifying. We won't be their match. Each one of them led one of the major hidden villages in their prime." Hiruzen muttered, "First Reikage, second Reikage, third Reikage, first Tsuchikage, second Tsuchikage, first Kazekage, second Kazekage, first Mizukage, second Mizukage, and third Mizukage. You reanimated all of them." Disbelief could be heard in Hiruzen's voice. He never expected to see such a sight in his old age. Fujin thought, "Except Minato, every dead cage is here. This crazy bastard collected everyone's DNA in the month-long break. That's why he was so confident. However, can he control them all?" Fujin's mind immediately went into overdrive, analyzing every information he had so far. He immediately concluded, no, he definitely must have some limit. Otherwise, he'd have revived way more ninjas and sent them after me. That said, he must have some means to keep some degree of control. Regardless, how do I tackle this? Even Fujin felt a bit overwhelmed and helpless. Had it been a few, he could have dealt with them. However, there were 14 reanimated cage in and around the barrier. Not to mention, Sakuma was keeping Gai, Kakashi, and Renjiro occupied in the arena. Fujin realized, this is impossible to deal with. If we break the barrier now and try to use our numerical advantage, hundreds of elite ninjas will be slaughtered. There is a good chance that the entire army would be wiped out. Even when Jiraiya reaches here, we won't have the forces to eliminate them. Even if I go all out and use my Flying Thunder God Jutsu and all my other hidden cards, I can't change the battle much. All of them are strong even among the S-rank. Some of them stood at the peak of S-rank when they were alive. They won't be caught off guard that easily. The best I can do is touch them and teleport them hundreds of kilometers away from here. However, Tabarama can easily counter this tactic. Even if I assume that they aren't marked yet and send 3 away before Tabarama reacts and marks everyone, that's still too much. Fujin glanced at Hiruzen and thought, the only way is the Death Reaper seal. However, just like his clone, Fujin too felt extremely uncomfortable at the way the events suddenly changed. He couldn't help but think about fate as well and have the same thoughts as his clone. Chapter 742, A Second of Hesitation. Heh, to think that the mighty Konoha would one day have to see such a day. Hazuki Genjutsu, the second Mizukage, taunted Hiruzen. He found the situation quite amusing. He wasn't the only one. The rest of the reanimated cages were quite surprised too. Irrespective of who it was, all of them had tried to destroy Konoha and failed miserably. No matter how many villages attacked Konoha, it remained a behemoth that couldn't be destroyed. Even though they weren't pleased that someone was controlling them, seeing the destruction of Konoha was quite a pleasant surprise for them. Hiruzen snorted and replied, I wonder if you'll be this amused when he reanimates all of you to attack your villages next. If Konoha falls, do you think your villages could stop him when he turns his eyes towards them? Immediately, the faces of all the cages became dark. Needless to say, that was their first thought. Even though none of them were at their full strength, their power was more than sufficient to destroy any great village. Since Hashirama and Tabarama had stopped their attacks momentarily, Hiruzen immediately decided to strike with his words. The third Mizukage thought, Hiruzen is correct. Unless the strength of our villages has immensely increased somehow, they won't be able to stop us. The best hope for their survival is if Hiruzen stops us. Of course, that is unless we can regain control of our bodies. If we do so, we can just kill Orochimaru first and then kill Hiruzen and destroy Konoha. His eyes quickly scanned through the situation outside the barrier as he analyzed. There are only Konoha ninjas. There must have been a war and Konoha won overwhelmingly, forcing Orochimaru to summon us. In this case, we could have a chance to break free of his control. The third Mizukage's scheming mind immediately calculated all the scenarios. The other cages had similar thoughts. The first Kazekage suddenly chuckled and said, as expected of the schemer's student, even without lifting a finger, you're making us want to eliminate your enemy first. Haha, Tabarama selected a good successor. Without skipping a beat, Hiruzen asked, "Do you see the fourth Kazekage outside the barrier? He was killed not too long ago by the very person who summoned you. Right now, your village doesn't have a single rank S ninja." The eyes of the first and second Kazekage widened in shock. Instinctively, both tried to break free of Orochimaru's control, making his job much more difficult. Orochimaru cursed, "Shit! If I allow him to keep speaking." Without showing his real emotions, Orochimaru chuckled and said, "It looks like age failed to tone down your scheming nature, sensei. You allied with Suna and killed the Kazekage under the pretense of a meeting, forcing the Sunagaku to attack Konoha recklessly and fall into your trap. The bodies of Suna ninjas are still littered in the arena." Without wasting any time, Orochimaru tried to confuse the two Kazekages. Needless to say, they didn't believe his words. However, they knew that they couldn't trust Hiruzen either. Orochimaru continued, "You can give up trying to break my control. The only thing that will be broken is the village you hold so dear to yourself." "Ha ha ha!" Hiruzen interrupted his laughter and claimed, "You can stop acting tough, Orochimaru. You were already having a difficult time controlling Lord First and Lord Second along with Sakumo and the two Kazekages. You have a lot of courage to keep reanimating more ninjas even in that condition. Tell me, how much of your strength can you exert?" In an instant, Orochimaru fell under a lot of pressure. The wills of 10 rank S ninjas attempted to break free of his control. In addition, his previous 5 summons were also passively resisting him. Even for someone as strong as Orochimaru, it was an extremely difficult thing to maintain control. Even though Orochimaru had improved Tabarama's Edo Tensei considerably, he was still a long distance away from the level to which Kabuto would have improved it in the future. He could still fight when he hadn't summoned 10 more cages. However, after summoning them, he was forced to focus entirely on maintaining control. In a way, his situation was similar to that of a puppet master. Even so, he laughed and said, "Hee hee, as expected of you, sensei. You're right, I won't be able to fight you much. However, do I really need to? Can you break through all the former cage and attack me? That'll be an amusing sight." Immediately, the reanimated cage began moving against their will. Hiruzen was about to face 12 former cage by himself. In the skies, Fujin continuously calculated several possibilities. He quickly eliminated most of them, but one remained in his mind. He thought, since teleporting the cages away won't help much, what if I directly eliminated Orochimaru? I can just prepare the Rasen Shuriken and hit him by teleporting close to him. Once he is taken out, Sakumo, Hashirama, and Tabarama won't be under his control. Even though none of them are at their peak, their strength is equivalent to the others. Along with me, Jiraiya, and Hiruzen, we could fight with them despite having just half the numbers. Not to mention, Guy and Kakashi would be freed up as well. However, Fujin hesitated. There were several flaws in his strategy. The very first flaw was that he wasn't certain if the Rasen Shuriken would kill Orochimaru. If Orochimaru survived and healed with his skin-shedding technique, Fujin would have exposed his Flying Thunder God Jutsu without gaining anything. The second flaw was that even if he killed Orochimaru, the odds were strongly against Konoha. Hashirama, Tabarama, and Sakumo could take on one opponent each. That would leave Fujin, Jiraiya, and Hiruzen to deal with 3 each. They were terrible odds even if Fujin went all out. Even if Guy took out one by opening the 7th inner gate, it wouldn't make much of a difference. While Kakashi and Renjiro were strong, their battle against Sakumo had shown that neither could battle at such a level. Fujin concluded, "The only way we could turn things around is if weaker Konoha ninjas take some of the cages on and stall them. However, this will result in extremely heavy casualties. Knowing Hiruzen, he might use the Death Reaper seal anyway to prevent those casualties, which again makes my attempt pointless." Fujin's calculations made him hesitate. As someone who loved keeping his cards hidden, it was against his nature to expose them without any certainty of results. Ironically, his biggest motivation to act out had nothing to do with Konoha or even Hiruzen. The main reason why he was tempted to stop being as careful as he always was to see whether he can force a major change to the future. It was his way of proving to himself that fate didn't exist, or at least his existence could impact major events. While Fujin hesitated, there was one person who didn't. Fujin extended his right arm and began forming the Rasengan in his right hand. However, even before he could completely form the basic Rasengan, Hiruzen created 12 shadow clones and all 13 weaved hand seals rapidly. They first weaved the snake seal and followed it with the boar, ram, rabbit, dog, rat, bird, horse, and snake seals in that order before clapping their hands together. Enma shouted, "Don't tell me you're—" In the sky, Fujin sensed the change in Hiruzen's chakra and stopped creating the Rasengan. He let out a sigh and thought, in the end, this still happened. That order of hand seals. Sarutoba, you are performing that jutsu. Enma thought in disbelief. Hiruzen glanced behind him and thought, so this is the god of death that Minato was saying only the caster of this jutsu can see. Sai, I hope this works. Orochimaru noticed Hiruzen's odd actions and said, no matter what you try, it's too late. I've won. Konoha will fall. Hiruzen didn't reply as he saw all 12 reanimated cages moving towards him. Without wasting any time, all of his shadow clones immediately moved towards them. In the forest, Gaara couldn't resist the bombardment of Naruto's supercharged wind jutsus. The explosion of Fujin's kunai had damaged the sand armor around him considerably, and before he could fix it, he was attacked by Naruto. To his horror, several sharp wind blades cut straight through the sand around his body. Several long cuts opened up on his body, injuring Gaara like he never was in his entire life. Even Fujin's clone was surprised. As Gaara's screams echoed through the forest, Fujin's clone couldn't help but wonder, could this attack kill Gaara or will he? Even before he could complete his thoughts, Gaara transformed entirely into Shukaku. Chapter 743, The Indomitable Third Hokage 1. Fujin's clone saw with a deadpan expression as Gaara transformed and Naruto used Kurama's chakra and summoned Gamabunta to stop him. He let out a sigh and muttered, fuck it. This is still beneficial for me. Time to do what I have to do. The chakra signature of Fujin's clone suddenly changed, and so did his appearance and physique. The change was so drastic that no one would be able to associate him with Fujin. At the same time, a seal imprint lit up on his right palm as he slammed it on the ground. Hundreds of flying thunder god marks spread throughout the area as a new seal imprint appeared on his left palm. He didn't make any other move and instead watched Shukaku and Gamabunta like a hawk. Inside the barrier, Orochimaru watched in amusement as Hiruzen's shadow clones moved to intercept the 12 former cage. The ones leading the charge were none other than Hashirama and Tobirama. Hiruzen's clone immediately noticed the changes in Hashirama's chakra and realized, so he's using that technique. Bringer of Darkness Jutsu. In an instant, Hashirama placed a hallucinatory darkness on Hiruzen and all his clones' eyesight, causing them to see nothing but black. However, Hiruzen and all his clones disrupted their chakra flow and released a large amount of Yang chakra. Yang release, Annihilator of Darkness Jutsu. Hashirama and Tobirama were surprised. Not even half a second had passed, and Hiruzen and his clones had broken Hashirama's genjutsu. Hiruzen thought, I may not have reached the raw power of Lord First or the speed of Lord Second, but I have lived long enough to surpass them in ninjutsu and genjutsu. Two of his shadow clones flickered in front of Hashirama and Tobirama. Both attacked his clones immediately, but his clones grabbed their arms. The arm of the god of death appeared from the chests of Hiruzen's clones, pierced the bodies of the former Hokages, and began extracting their souls. Hashirama muttered, so sorry, Sarutobi. Tobirama smirked and said, forgive us for troubling you. Hiruzen's clones replied remorsefully, please forgive me, Lord First, Lord Second. While Hiruzen's clones dealt with Hashirama and Tobirama, the other cages didn't stand still. They had already begun clashing with Hiruzen's clones. Lightning armor appeared on the third Raikage's body as he said, even though I'm not at my full strength, do you think that a mere clone can stop me? I never imagined that Konoha would be so desperate, that too against your own student. A shame that this didn't happen when I was alive. The clone facing him didn't reply. Instead, he wondered, how would he react if I informed him of the mess Fujin and Akuro created in the Land of Lightning? Hell stab, one finger assault. The third Raikage concentrated an extremely high amount of chakra into a single finger and moved towards Hiruzen's clone at an extremely high speed. However, Hiruzen's clone immediately counterattacked with vacuum bullets while moving backwards. The third Raikage quickly dodged them while reducing the distance between the two of them. Due to his far superior speed, he appeared in front of Hiruzen's clone in just a second. Unknown to him, this was also the moment Hiruzen's clone was waiting for. Wind release, serial vacuum wave jutsu. At such a close range, Hiruzen's clone fired extremely fast and sharp vacuum blades. Had he been alive, the third Raikage would have retreated. But due to Orochimaru's control and the immortal nature of the Edo Tensei body, he continued his attack. The vacuum blades hit him and sliced straight through the armor of his lightning chakra mode before hitting him. Several massive cuts opened up on his body, with the largest extending from his neck to his abdomen. Yet none of the vacuum blades managed to pierce through his body or enter deeper within his body, even though his body was considerably weaker than when he was alive. That's how strong his body was. Ignoring the injuries, he continued his attack but was shocked when Hiruzen's clone suddenly grabbed his wrist. The third Raikage's invincible spear was stopped. He turned his gaze towards his wrist and saw that Hiruzen's left hand was covered in wind chakra. The third Raikage immediately realized, now I see. The previous attack wasn't to kill or dismember me. Instead, he wanted to damage my lightning armor. Since the vacuum blade had cut my wrist, that part was momentarily without protection of my lightning armor, and that's why he could stop me. However, what's the use of doing this? He was confused. Even though Hiruzen's clone outplayed him, there wasn't any actual loss for him as he could still continue to attack. Suddenly, his eyes widened as the lightning around his body disappeared. Instead, he saw the god of death behind Hiruzen's clone, extracting his soul. Hiruzen's clone chuckled and said, "Death seems to have clouded your memories. Let me remind you why you never dared to duel against me." As his soul was extracted, the third Raikage recalled some of his memories. During the first Great Ninja War, Hiruzen had built up a terrifying reputation. Tabarama's death at the end of that war had been a huge blow to Konoha. In order to compensate for it, Hiruzen had trained so much that his strength had become extremely terrifying, to the extent that even the other cages didn't want to face him in battle. Over the next couple of great wars, the third Raikage had clashed with Hiruzen several times. However, those clashes convinced him to never confront Hiruzen by himself for a long time. Needless to say, he hadn't forgotten it. However, he was already dead, so he didn't particularly care if Hiruzen killed him. Yet seeing the god of death shocked him. Some distance away, intense winds were flowing around Shaman, the second Kazekage, as he confronted another one of Hiruzen's clones. He said, "I don't know whether you killed the fourth Kazekage or your student did. However, the winds are telling me that hundreds of my villagers were murdered here. I can only make you pay for their deaths." Hundreds of wind blades formed around him and bombarded Hiruzen's clone. Hiruzen's clone spat out a large amount of mud, which transformed into several walls and absorbed the wind blades. As soon as the barrage of wind blades ended, several mud bullets were launched from the mud. Shaman immediately dodged, but several mud tentacles suddenly burst out of the mud and tried to grab him. Before they could reach him, wolves made of wind appeared around him and shot wind explosion spheres at the tentacles and destroyed them. Shaman was about to turn his attention back to Hiruzen's shadow clone when several mud clones appeared out of the mud he had spit earlier and attacked Shaman. Shaman glanced at them and thought, the same jutsu for defending, attacking, and reinforcing him. His expertise in ninjutsu is at a whole different level from what I remember. The mud clones attacked him from one side, keeping Shaman busy. Hiruzen's clone used the opening to flicker behind him. However, even before Hiruzen's clone completed the body flicker jutsu, Shaman turned around and pointed both his palms towards Hiruzen's clone. Two large vacuum spheres were forming in each of his hands as he said, "I'm impressed. To think that fire-spitting youngster from back then has come so far, I wouldn't have imagined. Unfortunately, this isn't enough to stop me." Dozens of vacuum bullets, cannons, arrows, and vacuum blades were launched at Hiruzen's clone continuously from the large vacuum spheres. What made it even more complicated was that each of them acted in a different manner, making defending extremely difficult. However, Hiruzen's clone shot multiple vacuum bullets at him. For a moment, Shaman was confused as Hiruzen's clone had attacked instead of dodging. After all, piercing wounds were useless against an Edo Tensei, but the clone would be dispelled if gravely injured. As the first vacuum bullet shot by Hiruzen's clone reached close to the incoming barrage, it exploded. The winds released from the explosion were strong enough to divert the incoming attacks, just enough to miss Hiruzen's clone. All of his other bullets exploded in the same manner, creating a path for Hiruzen's clone to move forward. Shaman's eyes widened as he thought, "Incredible! To think that he can even use my vacuum bullet jutsu in such a manner. It'll shut down most of the wind jutsus. Of course, it isn't completely safe, but he has managed to avoid all my attacks." As a wind user, Shaman liked to fight from a distance. He was about to retreat when the mud clones behind him launched suicidal attacks, cutting his retreat path. Without being able to retreat and having very little time to react, he coated his fists and legs in wind chakra and attacked Hiruzen's clone. However, Hiruzen's clone very easily gained the upper hand in taijutsu and quickly grabbed both of his hands. Shaman said, "You've grown very skillful. I don't recall ever seeing anyone as skillful as you." As the god of death's arm entered Shaman's body, Hiruzen's clone replied, "I've had time to train. To be honest, your mastery of wind manipulation was one of the few things I couldn't get a hang of. Fortunately, I've had some inspiration lately." Hiruzen's clone chuckled, offending Shaman slightly, who retorted, "If I was at my full power and not inside a small barrier, even your main body wouldn't have been able to stop me." Hiruzen's clone chuckled once again and said, "The times have changed. In your time, your talent in wind manipulation was the best. For decades, no one came close to your level. Until a few years ago, when a young ninja showing even greater talent than yours appeared in Konoha. Chapter 744, The Indomitable Third Hokage 2. The most talented ninja in wind manipulation is from Konoha. Shaman, the second Kazekage, was shocked while being disappointed at the same time that no one in Sunagaku reached the same heights he did. He turned his head up and observed another intense bombardment on the defenses raised by his two successors. His eyes immediately fell on Ryu and widened. He observed, such a pure wind chakra. No, it is enhanced by nature chakra. How is his wind chakra still so pure then, and the boy on his back? His control over the winds is. He turned his attention towards Hiruzen's clone and asked, "Is it that boy?" Shaman was truly surprised by Fujin's control over the winds. He never expected a teenager to reach such a level. Hiruzen's clone nodded. Shaman chuckled and said, "A shame that he was born so late. I'd have enjoyed fighting him far more than Tabarama." A peculiar expression appeared on the face of Hiruzen's clone as he recalled the shit Fujin had pulled in the land of wind. He thought, "I honestly doubt you would. Sensei did a lot of things, but he never shook the foundation of any country for a mere promotion mission. I can't even imagine what this boy would do in the next Great War. Sai, I should have warned Jiraiya. Luckily, Shikaku also knows about it. The last time I saw you, you were a hot-blooded fellow. I didn't think I'd see you in your old age. Tell me, is Anoki still the Tsuchikage?" Mew asked. Hiruzen's clone replied, "Yes, he has developed quite a reputation as well." Mew chuckled and began floating in the sky and began forming a cube in his hands. With a grin, he said, "You can thank me later. If you're quick enough, you could seal some of them before they regenerate." "I'm afraid you won't have the chance to do that, Master Mew." Mew was surprised to hear a familiar voice. He looked behind him to see old Anoki floating and preparing the atomic dismantling jutsu even faster than him. Mew immediately realized, a genjutsu! He quickly disrupted his chakra and broke the genjutsu. Anoki disappeared, but Hiruzen's clone appeared in front of him. He realized, he delayed me just enough that he could reach me before I completed my jutsu. Mew immediately flew backwards, but before he could get away, sparks appeared around the hands of Hiruzen's clone. Lightning release! Hell prison jutsu! He launched hundreds of lightning chains from his fingertips. None of them directly attacked Mew. Instead, they moved around him, making it impossible for him to fly away before attacking him from every direction. However, even that was a distraction. The lightning itself wasn't strong enough to cause much damage. Its real purpose was just to slow down Mew. The real attack was Hiruzen's shadow clone using the opportunity to get closer to Mew. However, since the clone didn't manipulate his chakra, Mew became confused and wondered, does he want to engage in a taijutsu battle against me so high up? The clone's palm struck Mew's abdomen, and the god of death's arm entered his body. Mew's eyes widened in shock as he finally saw the god of death behind the clone. He realized, so this is why he acted in such a manner. Still, he turned his gaze towards Hiruzen's clone while thinking. He anticipated my every move and acted before I could attack. Some distance away, similar thoughts ran through the mind of Hazuki Genjutsu as he was helpless against Hiruzen's clone. He thought, this brat, he knows all my abilities, but I have no idea about his. The last time I saw him, he specialized just in fire release. However, he hasn't used a single fire jutsu yet. Instead, his lightning release is stronger than his fire release was back in the day. The most surprising thing is that his proficiency in genjutsu is almost as high as my own. I can't place him under a genjutsu at all. Is he a secret Uchiha or something? Suddenly, several wind shurikens appeared out of thin air and cut straight through the water balloons floating around Genjutsu before changing their direction and moving towards Genjutsu from all directions. Genjutsu immediately turned his body into water with a smirk on his face. With his hydrification technique, most physical attacks were useless against him. However, Genjutsu's smirk immediately vanished as several lightning currents coursed through his liquefied body. He turned his gaze towards the wind shurikens that had entered his body and realized he hid small amounts of lightning chakra at the center of each of those wind shurikens. Due to the wind chakra, the lightning chakra was completely hidden. Even someone like me couldn't sense it because of how little lightning chakra was in each shuriken. Individually, it wouldn't have been an issue for me. However, with all of them together, the attack still didn't hurt Genjutsu much. Even if he were made of flesh and blood, the attack wouldn't have left any wounds on his body, let alone when he had an immortal body. However, the short moment for which he was stunned was all Hiruzen's clone needed to let the god of death start the process of extracting his soul. Even after dying, your habit of staying in the background hasn't changed, third Mizukage. Hiruzen's clone teased as he confronted him. A third Mizukage snorted and said, "You should be the last person criticizing others for acting from the background. Others may not have understood the degree to which Root operated, but it is obvious to me." The expression of Hiruzen's clone dulled a bit after hearing Root. Despite Konoha being attacked to such a degree, he hadn't heard anything about Danzo's movements. While it was true that he and Shikaku didn't include Danzo in their plans, Hiruzen still expected his old friend to act. Even though Hiruzen couldn't sense what was happening inside the village, he had a feeling that his old comrade hadn't made any moves to help Konoha and reduce the casualties. The third Mizukage launched several long-range water jutsus while taunting. "Did I hit a sore spot?" Hiruzen's clone snorted and replied, "You didn't dare to fight me when you were alive. Do you think the result will be any different after you've been dead for over a decade?" Hiruzen's clone immediately dodged the attack while counterattacking and decreasing the distance between them. Both moved at an incredible speed, flickering non-stop, yet Hiruzen's clone was just a few steps away from him in a matter of seconds. A sword appeared in the hands of the third Mizukage. His chakra flowed through it as he swung it at Hiruzen's clone. Hiruzen's clone grabbed a kunai and flowed lightning chakra through it. However, instead of attacking, he suddenly gave up his momentum and instead blocked the third Mizukage's blade with his kunai. The sudden change of momentum surprised the third Mizukage. His blade pushed the kunai down as Hiruzen's clone crouched behind. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he felt something entering his body. Before he realized it, his soul was being sucked out of his body, and he saw the god of death behind Hiruzen's clone. He realized, so that's why he has been acting in such a way. This is why others suddenly stopped moving after Hiruzen's clones touched them. He wasn't aiming to fight and defeat us. Instead, he just wants to have that thing extract our souls. However, what jutsu is this? How can such a jutsu even exist? Why didn't he just kill everyone with this jutsu during the previous wars? Several questions arose in his mind. Unfortunately, his soul would be sealed inside the god of death before he could receive any answers. Hiruzen's remaining clones dealt with their opponents as well. The first and second Reikage, first Mizukage, first Tsuchikage, and first Keizukage had their souls extracted by the god of death. Hiruzen, the third Hokage, had taken on 12 former Kage while being trapped inside a barrier. Even though the former Kage were nowhere near their full strength and could barely be considered rank S ninjas, they still had immortal bodies. Yet in just 30 seconds, Hiruzen's shadow clones had started extracting everyone's souls and sealing them inside the god of death. The first one to be sealed was Hashirama, followed by Tabarama. Neither of them resisted the process. The third Mizukage was the last one to have his soul getting extracted, but even that was a mere 10 seconds after Hashirama was sealed. Unlike the previous Hokages, the other Kages tried to resist, just like how Orochimaru did in the original story. Unfortunately for them, the immortal Edo Tensei body didn't help them much in this regard, and everyone's souls were extracted within a span of a few seconds with little struggle, leaving Orochimaru with wide eyes. Chapter 745, The Opportunity. After reanimating the former Kages, Orochimaru was under heavy strain. His Edo Tensei was a far cry from the level Kabuto raised it to years later in the original story. Not only were the reanimated ninjas weaker, but he had a much more difficult time controlling them as well. He had exceeded his limits by summoning 15 rank S ninjas at the same time. As a result, he could barely even move. Hiruzen's analysis was accurate. If Orochimaru got even a bit distracted, there was a high chance that he could lose control and the reanimated Kage would be able to act as per their will. Needless to say, he was well aware that all of them would try to kill him first without a shred of doubt in their hearts. Even though there was a chance that they could destroy Konoha later and Orochimaru could be revived through the curse seals, he didn't want to let that happen. Hence, he hid behind the 12 reanimated Kages after summoning them. He expected Hiruzen to attack him, as sealing the 12 Kage by himself was more or less impossible. However, Hiruzen was equally concerned with stopping the reanimated Kage from the enemy villages. Even if they killed Orochimaru, the 12 former Kage could wreak havoc throughout Konoha before they were sealed. Hiruzen didn't want to see hundreds or thousands of Konoha ninjas falling. Hence, to Orochimaru's surprise, Hiruzen had done the opposite, targeting the reanimated Kages instead of him. Hiruzen's main body stayed back and only moved towards Orochimaru when he wanted the reanimated Kage to move towards himself and give his clones an opening to seal them. What Orochimaru never imagined was that a single touch was enough to stop all the reanimated Kages. His eyes widened as he completely failed to hide the shock on his face or understand what the hell had just happened. He involuntarily exclaimed, "What the fuck happened?" Orochimaru had worked hard to collect DNA samples of all the former Kage. As a true researcher and someone obsessed with ninjutsu, Orochimaru had longed for their DNA samples for a long time. he had access to the cells of Hashirama and Tabarama from Danzo when he was in Konoha. Getting Minato's cells was easy as well after his death. However, getting access to the dead cage of other villages was extremely difficult. Danzo had tried it long ago with his root subordinate. However, the other villages were well aware of Tabarama's Edo Tensei Jutsu and protected their dead very well. Even the elite root ninjas couldn't reach it, while sending rank S ninjas to such a place was too risky. As a result, Danzo never got his hands on them. Since Konoha never displayed the Edo Tensei Jutsu despite two deadly great wars happening in close succession, the other villages finally started relaxing. Combined with the fact that the second and third great ninja wars had resulted in massive casualties, the villages decided to focus more on the living than the dead. Hence, Orochimaru got the opening required to steal a few cells from their dead bodies. Of course, it wasn't easy. He didn't know the ins and outs of other villages, so infiltrating them and sneaking into their graveyard was far more difficult than entering Konoha. To make matters even more complicated, he had to do it sneakily. Had his actions been noticed, every major village and cage would start hunting him down. While he wasn't afraid of them, they'd also increase security around their graveyards or destroy the dead bodies to prevent anyone else from doing what he did. That would be a huge loss of future research material for Orochimaru. Hence, he had worked for several years to get the DNA samples of the cage from other villages. However, there was one exception. Unlike other villages, Kumagakure didn't reduce the security around their graveyards. Orochimaru wasn't able to get the DNA samples of the previous raikages. He finally got the opportunity just before the invasion began, and that opportunity was provided by none other than Fujin, who killed hundreds of Kumo elites following Hiruzen's plans and wreaked havoc inside Kumagakure using his Akuro identity. Due to these events, Kumagakure became more engaged in improving the security of their village and finding the missing ninjas. Protecting their graveyards, which had never been attacked, took a backseat. Despite being busy with preparations, Orochimaru had spent a few days collecting their samples. The reason for doing so wasn't just for the attack on Konoha. It was just that he had the perfect opportunity to get them. Since he had them, he decided to add them to the other Edo Tensei summonings he was planning to use in case his other preparations weren't good enough. Regardless, it was a very difficult task, something Orochimaru had spent a lot of time on. Yet, Hiruzen sealed 12 of the 14 reanimated cages in under a minute. Speechless, Orochimaru wondered, why did they all suddenly stop, and how did his clones extract their souls so easily? What were those hand seals Sensei performed earlier? He gazed towards Hiruzen and their gazes met. The 12 shadow clones were dispelled after the souls of the cages were sealed inside the God of Death. At that very moment, Hiruzen moved towards Orochimaru at blinding speed. Just like in the original story, Gaara fell asleep and Shukaku and Gamabunter engaged in an intense battle. It was then that the moment Fujin's clone was waiting for arrived. It was the main reason why Fujin didn't dispel this clone to get his chakra back. Gamabunter's sword sliced through Shukaku's arm, sending the gigantic sand arm to the ground. Fujin's clone thought, "This is it!" He immediately teleported to the flying thunder god mark closest to the arm and placed his left hand on Shukaku's arm. Due to it being just cut, it still had a decent amount of Shukaku's chakra inside it. It was about to return to Shukaku when it suddenly stopped, before being sucked into the seal on the left hand of Fujin's clone. Not even a minuscule amount of Shukaku's chakra inside the arm could escape. Shukaku immediately glanced in that direction and realized, "Hey, my chakra is being stolen." He wasn't the only one. Gamabunter noticed the sudden change as well and thought, Shukaku's chakra from that arm suddenly disappeared. What's that chakra signature? Who is it, and when did that person appear here? Gamabunter failed to recognize the chakra signature, and due to the gigantic arm, neither Shukaku nor Gamabunter could see who the person was. Even if they did, it wouldn't help them identify who it was. As for the other genins, their attention was entirely on Naruto and Gaara. Pakan didn't notice this strange event either, as Fujin's clone had masked his smell entirely. Shukaku immediately lost his cool. "Disgusting humans! Sealing me inside a child wasn't enough humiliation. You still dare to steal my chakra? Eat my drilling air bullet!" Shukaku inhaled deeply and shot out a large, high-pressure air blast at his arm. It completely blew up the sand arm and destroyed the forest behind it. Shikamaru picked up Sasuke and Lee and immediately hid behind the large trees. Pakan and Temari hid similarly as the intense winds blasted through their area. Despite taking cover, each of them felt the intense winds and barely managed to stay on the ground. Shikamaru thought, "Man, what a battle! Why did he suddenly attack his arm, though? Luckily, we weren't in the line of attack, or we'd be dead." Due to the intense winds, the sand restricting Sakura fell off. Shikamaru immediately caught her and retreated back to where Sasuke and Lee were. Shukaku laughed, exclaiming, "Steal that fucker! Ha ha ha, now it's your turn, Toad!" Naruto asked, "Steal? What is he talking about? Chief, is Sakura safe?" Gamabunta ignored him and wondered, did that person die so easily? His chakra signature disappeared right when the air bullet hit that area. Did he die or somehow retreat? Naruto shouted, "Chief, is Sakura all right? That attack was in their direction." Gamabunta answered in an annoyed tone, "She is fine. All of your friends are safe. As long as he is defeated, everyone will be safe." Naruto sighed in relief and their battle continued. A long distance away, Fujin's clone appeared out of thin air with a giant grin on his face. He thought, though I couldn't get Shukaku, this is good too. Now, time to test that seal. I hope it works as intended. Chapter 746, Momentum. Orochimaru immediately flickered away while thinking, whatever his weird jutsu is, it works by touching his opponents. I can't let him touch me, at least not until I figure out what it does. Hiruzen immediately chased after Orochimaru, intent clearly visible on his face. He resolved, 10 years ago I made a grave mistake by letting my emotions cloud my judgment and letting you go. In all the decades I have led this village, that was my second biggest mistake. I can't fix my biggest mistake, but I'll fix this one. The student-master duel flickered at an intense speed inside the barrier. They were so fast that the Sound Four couldn't even track their movements. Overall, Orochimaru was faster. Unfortunately, he was restrained by the very barrier he raised to trap Hiruzen. Due to the confined space, Hiruzen made steady gains, reducing the distance between them every second. As he appeared just a few steps away from Orochimaru, Orochimaru used the hidden shadow snake jutsu and launched dozens of snakes at Hiruzen while shouting, "Old geezer, do you think you can sustain that jutsu forever? How much chakra do you still have left? Just die!" Orochimaru's prediction was on point. Even though Hiruzen had made a short work of the reanimated ninjas, it wasn't without cost. His chakra reserves had taken a major hit. Even so, Hiruzen grinned and said, "I can sustain it until I fix my mistake, my ignorant disciple. Let me educate you one last time." Fire release. Yang Demon Jutsu. Hiruzen's chakra suddenly flared, and an intense yang and fire chakra exited from every chakra point in his body. It immediately transformed into black flames and covered his entire body. The snakes hit the flames and hissed painfully as they were burnt alive. The fire rapidly spread through their bodies and moved towards Orochimaru, who cut them while retreating. He cursed, "Have you gone senile, old man? You dare to use that jutsu without any protection." The black flames around Hiruzen's body not only burnt the snakes, but were also burning his flesh. After the third Reikage created the lightning chakra mode, Hiruzen was inspired to create a fire chakra mode. He gained some successes initially, but soon reached a bottleneck. While he could create extremely hot flames, his body couldn't endure such heat. Initially, his body adapted, making his skin and flesh far more resilient to fire. However, it reached a limit very soon and couldn't endure higher temperatures. No matter what Hiruzen tried, he couldn't overcome this physical limit. Later on, he tried to use jutsus to resist the flames so that he could fight without getting hurt. He tried several water and earth jutsus, as those two elements resisted fire the most. In the end, he created a modified version of the iron skin jutsu that worked very well. Unfortunately, the result was subpar, as using another element decreased the power of the Yang Demon Jutsu considerably. Hiruzen still made a few modifications, but the final result paled when compared to Reikage's Lightning Chakra mode. As a result, Hiruzen ended up dropping that idea. However, Hiruzen wasn't very concerned about his life at that moment. His goal was to kill Orochimaru irrespective of the cost, hence he didn't hesitate to use such a suicidal jutsu. Hiruzen quickly gave chase again, the flames making him even faster. In just a couple of seconds, he appeared close to Orochimaru. Water release. Gale River Jutsu. Orochimaru released a stream of water straight at Hiruzen. However, it wasn't ordinary water. Even though there wasn't a lot of water and it wasn't very forceful, the water had a very high amount of wind and yin chakra. It decreased the temperature of the water, almost making it icy cold. Hiruzen immediately realized, combining water, wind, and yin chakras in such a gentle manner, it looks like he was developing a counter for my undying flame jutsu. However, this jutsu is still incomplete. It can't stop me, on the contrary. Even though Hiruzen understood that Orochimaru's jutsu would suppress the fire strengthened by Yang's chakra around his body, he rushed straight into it. The icy water cooled off the flames around Hiruzen as he moved straight through it. Orochimaru immediately realized, this isn't enough to stop him. Shit! Orochimaru bit his thumb and slammed it on the ground. Summoning jutsu, Rashaman! Orochimaru didn't even glance at the ground. Instead, his eyes were fixed on his earlier jutsu. At the center of the water was a burning red dot which was moving towards him at a blinding speed. A single gate of Rashomon rose and protected Orochimaru in the nick of time as a staff crashed into the gate. Needless to say, the staff was the Monkey King Enma. However, there was one big difference. Just like Hiruzen, the staff was covered in black flames too. The hardness of the staff, combined with the incredibly hot black flames and the force with which it slammed into the gate, meant that even the gate of Rashomon couldn't endure it. Cracks appeared at the center of the gate and soon spread throughout it. Enma smashed through the gate and went straight at Orochimaru, who thought even the gate of Rashomon couldn't stop Enma. Due to the short time, I couldn't raise more gates, but I still didn't expect it to fall. The flames strengthened him too much. However, he shouldn't be immune to those flames irrespective of how hard his body gets. A sword appeared in Orochimaru's right hand as he swung it to block Enma. The staff and the sword clashed, stopping the staff from extending endlessly. However, the force with which Enma slammed into Orochimaru was too strong. To make matters worse for Orochimaru, his sword, even though extremely good and of superior quality to Kazekiri, was inferior to the one broken by Fujin in the Forest of Death. Without it, Enma didn't feel any pain and he sent Orochimaru's sword flying away. Yet there was no panic in Orochimaru's eyes. He had already expected it and was concentrating his chakra. Before the staff could slam into him, Orochimaru placed his left hand on it and said, "I always wondered how much you could endure, Enma." Orochimaru unleashed a massive amount of lightning straight into the burning staff. Enma, who already had to endure Hiruzen's intense flames, suddenly also had to endure intense lightning shocks wreaking havoc throughout his body. A wide grin appeared on Orochimaru's face as Enma couldn't sustain his transformation and turned back into his original appearance. He thought, "Finally I have a chance to reset the momentum. Now it's my tour." However, Orochimaru's grin was wiped out in the blink of an eye. Even though Enma's transformation ended, the shadow that the staff was casting on the floor of the barrier still existed, and it was connected to Orochimaru's shadow. Orochimaru's expression became grim as he wondered Nara's secret technique. However, when did he? His eyes widened as he realized, the Rashomon. I took my eyes off him for a mere second. He must have extended his shadow along the shadow of the staff then. When two top-tier ninjas battled, momentum was a major factor that could decide victory and defeat. When Fujin and Orochimaru battled in the Forest of Death, Fujin had gained complete control over the momentum after Orochimaru was blown up due to his trap, and Fujin destroyed the sword of Kusanagi. However, Orochimaru successfully reset the momentum by double-bluffing Fujin. However, his opponent this time wasn't Fujin. It was the vastly more experienced Hiruzen. Even though Fujin was very experienced for his age, he was still a child when compared to a veteran like Hiruzen. Hiruzen had gained the momentum by attacking Orochimaru before he could recover from the strain the reanimated ninjas put on him. And now that he had the momentum, Hiruzen wouldn't squander it like Fujin did. Of course, it also showed the difference in their priorities. Fujin always gave the highest priority to his own safety. He didn't mind squandering such advantages to ensure he stayed safe. On the other hand, Hiruzen gave the highest priority to Konoha. He was willing to give up his life if the need be. Chapter 747, A Blade of Wind. Ninja Art, Shadow Stitching Jutsu. Several sharp tendril-like needles rose from the shadow under Orochimaru's feet and pierced through his body, binding him in one spot. At the same time, Hiruzen's figure became visible as he moved through Orochimaru's Gale River Jutsu. Even though the jutsu failed to stop him, the flames on Hiruzen's body were significantly weaker. Orochimaru cursed, "Shit, I was too focused on the mysterious jutsu he used to seal the cages and the flames around his body. He noticed it and used my own jutsus to hide his real scheme. This won't be easy. I need to break this shadow first and then deal with those pesky flames while keeping him away." Orochimaru began exerting his chakra. A large amount of yang chakra was released from his chakra points and began weakening the shadow's hold. At the same time, Orochimaru's body itself started transforming. His human features started fading away as he began looking even more like a white snake. Several snakes exited his mouth and began moving towards Hiruzen. However, Hiruzen moved without any fear. The weakened flames around his body still had enough heat to burn all the snakes coming towards him. Before Orochimaru could fully transform, Hiruzen appeared in front of him and punched Orochimaru's abdomen with all his might. All the remaining flames on his body transferred onto Orochimaru's body, burning him. However, his snake body was far more resilient than a normal human body. Along with the fact that the flames had weakened a lot, Orochimaru wasn't hurt. A grin appeared on Orochimaru's face as he exclaimed, "Such a weak flame will not burn me." Suddenly his eyes widened. He failed to release any more yang chakra. His transformation also stopped. Orochimaru wondered, "What the hell? I can't initiate any jutsu!" He suddenly exclaimed fearfully, "What is that?" As the god of death's arm entered his body and began extracting his soul, Orochimaru finally saw the god of death behind Hiruzen. Hiruzen chuckled and replied, "This is the jutsu the fourth Hokage used to seal the 9 tails." With a grin on his face, Hiruzen exclaimed, "I will now fix the mistake I committed a decade ago. I will now pull out your soul from whoever's body this is. You'll be sealed inside the god of death and suffer inside his belly for eternity." Hiruzen immediately began extracting Orochimaru's soul while Orochimaru analyzed, "So that's the god of death. No wonder he was able to seal them so easily." However, Orochimaru immediately exerted all his strength. Though he couldn't move nor use any jutsus, he managed to pull his soul back into his body. He chuckled and said, "You won't get your way, old man. You don't have the chakra to seal me. Hee, I admit you nearly scared me by putting up a strong front. However, you used up most of your chakra while sealing them." Hiruzen's grin disappeared. He realized, I reached this stage and fell short on chakra." Hiruzen was livid. He was one step away from sealing Orochimaru but fell short as he was about to run out of chakra. Had he been a few years younger, he'd have done the job. Unfortunately, that was no longer the case. Sealing 12 cage had drained him. He quickly analyzed, "I don't have the chakra to completely seal him inside of me. The only way I can do that is if—" Suddenly, the entire barrier shook. Both Hiruzen and Orochimaru glanced above and saw it being hit by another wind breath from Ryu. The Sound Four fell to their knees and began coughing blood violently. They immediately began inserting all their chakra into the barrier while thinking, "This is the last time. If another attack hits the barrier, it'll collapse. However, how can he stop another round of attack by himself?" While Hiruzen dealt with Orochimaru and the reanimated cages, the third and fourth cages blocked 3 more rounds of attacks from Fujin and the Konoha ninjas. However, Fujin and Ryu finally got the opening they were looking for. Ryu immediately fired a wind breath through the opening, which first hit the defenseless third cage and obliterated him. His body had been minced into minute particles as the wind breath passed through it before the wind breath hit the barrier. The Konoha ninjas immediately cheered. "The third cage is dealt with. Only the fourth cage and that barrier remain." What's that? The Konoha ninjas suddenly noticed a blue light shining on top of the barrier. The morale of the ones with a keen eyesight suddenly increased as a massive Rasengan smashed into the barrier. The Hyuga ninjas immediately exclaimed, "Lord Jiraiya is here as well. Orochimaru is dead." The morale of every Konoha ninja shot through the roof. Needless to say, it was the opposite for the Sound Four. Ryu's attack itself was too much for them. They were barely hanging by a thread. Jiraiya's attack finally broke that thread. As cracks spread throughout the barrier, Orochimaru finally panicked. If he was held down by Hiruzen when Fujin and Jiraiya entered, he would be dead without a shred of doubt. While Orochimaru believed that his old comrade might hesitate, he did not doubt that Fujin would go straight for his head. Hiruzen quickly analyzed as well, "If they help, I can seal his entire soul inside the god of death. However, my chakra is too low. I won't be able to do that." So the question is, will that be more beneficial for Konoha than sealing his entire soul inside the god of death? Thoughts clashed in Hiruzen's brain at the speed of light as he made his decision even before Jiraiya and Fujin broke the barrier. He decided, even if I seal him inside the god of death, I'm not sure if he'll be dead for good. That cursed seal of his has a sliver of his soul. According to my calculations, it could be used to revive him. If that happens, sealing him entirely wouldn't be the end of this battle. He'll continue to target Konoha. Even if his strength is far weaker, he could just use Edo Tensei to keep attacking us. That won't be good for the village. A smile appeared on Hiruzen's face. He said, "You're right. I have very little chakra left. I can't seal your entire soul in the belly of the god of death. However," Hiruzen's grin became much wider, making Orochimaru feel extremely uneasy. Hiruzen suddenly exerted a lot of force and pulled out the arms of Orochimaru's soul from his body. The god of death raised his blade as Hiruzen exclaimed, "Even though I can't seal your entire soul, I'll take away the thing that you value the most." Shadow Clone Jutsu. Fujin created a shadow clone who immediately flickered to where the third Kage's body was reforming and began sealing him. Rasa was about to intervene but was stopped by the jutsus launched by the Konoha ninjas. At the same time, Jirobo shouted, "The barrier can't stand any longer. Orochimaru-sama is in a difficult spot too. Leave the barrier to me. You 3 rescue Orochimaru-sama." The others understood what the result would be. The 4 Violet Flames formation needed 4 ninjas to create it. If just a single ninja tried to sustain it while under intense attack, there would be just one result. However, understanding the situation, all 3 of them immediately flickered. Jirobo sustained the barrier with his life, but could only buy a second before he collapsed dead. The barrier finally collapsed. Fujin jumped off Ryu's back and immediately flickered towards the rooftop while wondering, what in the hell? Why is Hiruzen so impatient? Is his chakra so low that he can't even keep Orochimaru tied for a few more seconds? Fujin wasn't entirely sure. After all, Hiruzen's battle was far more intense than what it was in the original story. However, he was more worried about another thing. He thought, even now, there was a chance for things to be different. Had Hiruzen waited, he could have sealed Orochimaru entirely with our help. Yet, at the very last moment, he made such an illogical move. Are important events going to happen exactly like they did in the original story? Does that mean that my killing and sealing Kabuto will be useless too? Would someone else perform the Edo Tensei Jutsu during the Fourth Great War? And would it end with Naruto and Sasuke sealing Kaguya no matter what I do? Fujin was unwilling to accept this. Even though he wanted to keep the events the same, it was because he wanted to take advantage of certain opportunities to change the future in a way that would benefit him the most. However, if the events would stay the same no matter what he did, all his plans would be useless. Unlike Fujin, Jiraiya was more worried about Hiruzen's state. He immediately realized which jutsu Hiruzen was using. A stunned expression appeared on Orochimaru's face as he realized, "Don't tell me!" He shouted, "No!" As the blade began falling, Hiruzen shouted, "I shall take away all your jutsu. Seal!" The god of death's blade sliced through Orochimaru's soul, taking his arms away. Orochimaru realized, "My arms, they're paralyzed!" He shouted, "You useless old man, give me back my arms!" With a smile on his face, Hiruzen said, "It's over. You can no longer use your arms and hence never weave any hand signs. You'll never be able to learn any new ninjutsu. Even though you can perform many jutsus without any seals, good luck performing them without a part of your soul. Of course, that is if you manage to get away alive." Orochimaru continued screaming, but Hiruzen no longer heard his voice. The part of Orochimaru's soul that had been cut by the god of death was pulled into Hiruzen's chest by the god of death. He grabbed Hiruzen's soul as well and began extracting it out. The cost of using such a deadly jutsu was the soul of the caster. Just like Minato and the 12 cages he sealed inside the god of death, Hiruzen's soul would also be sealed inside the god of death. Most of Hiruzen's soul had been extracted, however. Before the god of death could take his entire soul, a blade of wind appeared out of thin air and sliced through Hiruzen's soul. Chapter 748, The Impact of Fujin's Existence. Before the god of death could extract Hiruzen's entire soul, a blade of wind appeared out of thin air and sliced through Hiruzen's soul. For the very first time, the smile on the face of the god of death disappeared. His eyes widened as around 20% of Hiruzen's soul returned to his body. He immediately extended his arm towards Hiruzen's body, but before he could reach his body, the god of death began disappearing. The Reaper Death Seal Jutsu had ended. Hiruzen fell to the ground with a smile on his face. Shock appeared on Jiraiya's face as he wondered, what in the world was that? Could only a part of the soul be used as a sacrifice for this jutsu? Regardless, this is good news. The only question is, can Sensei live with so little of his soul remaining? However, there was one person even more shocked than Jiraiya, and that person was none other than Fujin. He looked at Hiruzen with a stunned expression and exclaimed internally, "What the hell? That's my fucking wind domain. When did this old fox copy it?" The wind blade that sliced Hiruzen's soul wasn't from Fujin or any other ninja. It was used by none other than Hiruzen. After Minato's death, Hiruzen had studied the Reaper Death Seal in great detail. He reached such a stage that no other ninja in history, including the Uzumaki ninja who created this seal, knew as much about it as Hiruzen did. It was during this study, Hiruzen realized that once the enemy's soul had been sealed, there was a chance that the caster could continue living by cutting his own soul and deactivating the jutsu. However, there were several issues. The very first was that the god of death's blade couldn't be used for that purpose, and normal attacks couldn't cut through the soul perfectly and could end up destroying the soul entirely. Hence, Hiruzen worked on creating a jutsu that could cut through the soul perfectly. It wasn't very difficult to do due to his expertise in manipulating yin chakra. He created a jutsu that looked very similar to the Blade of Wind, but had very little wind chakra and far more yin chakra, which was the most effective against souls. That led him to the second issue, which was to time the jutsu to cut through his soul at the perfect time. In order for this to work, he would need to wait until the god of death sealed the soul of his enemy and only then cut his soul. However, the god of death took both souls at almost the same time. There was an extremely small window of opportunity to cut his soul and still live after using the Reaper Death Seal. If he created the jutsu early and waited, the god of death could become suspicious and take his soul before the enemy's soul. On the other hand, if he waited until the god of death sealed the enemy's soul, it would be too late. Trying to make a move hastily would only result in the caster's death. For over a decade, Hiruzen couldn't solve this issue. He had pretty much given up on it. Fortunately, he gained the solution to his problem when he saw Fujin using the wind domain. It perfectly resolved the timing problem. Hence, it could be said that Hiruzen's survival was an impact of Fujin transmigrating to the Naruto world. Without Fujin, Hiruzen would have never seen the wind domain and wouldn't have any chance of survival after using the Reaper Death Seal. Even though Fujin was shocked to see Hiruzen copying his technique, he was relieved to see the future possibly changing. When Hiruzen was debating whether to seal Orochimaru or not, he had two choices. The first was to wait for Fujin and Jiraiya and have them injure Orochimaru and consume his chakra. That way, he could seal his soul entirely. However, Hiruzen had very little chakra left. Even if Orochimaru ran out of chakra, his willpower alone would require every bit of Hiruzen's chakra to seal him. That meant that he wouldn't have any chakra left to save himself. He would have still done it had Orochimaru's death been absolute. However, knowing that he could still be revived, Hiruzen decided to ensure his own safety. If he lived, he could once again counter the Edo Tensei Jutsu in the future, and the next Hokage wouldn't need to sacrifice his or her life to stop Orochimaru again. Hence, Hiruzen released most of his chakra into the air, which transformed into winds consisting of a high amount of yin chakra. The god of death didn't pay any attention to it since it mixed with the air, while Orochimaru's attention was more on the god of death. Hiruzen waited until the right moment and made a move right after the fragment of Orochimaru's soul had been sealed and ended the jutsu right after. Of course, even if he was alive for the moment, the damage to his soul was truly devastating. He fell unconscious as soon as his soul was sliced. In a secret base in the land of grass, Jugo exclaimed in panic, "Kimimaro, what happened to you? Did your illness flare up again?" Juzo was talking to Kimimaro when Kimimaro suddenly collapsed to his knees. Even though he didn't scream, the pain was visible on his face. He placed his hand on his curse seal and thought, "This pain! Orochimaru-sama, old man, give me my arms!" Orochimaru screamed in rage. However, Hiruzen had already lost consciousness. Teuya, Kidomaru, and Saken shouted as they flickered towards him. Orochimaru glanced at them and noticed Fujin and Jiraiya right behind them. He shouted, "Kill Hiruzen!" Teuya, Kidomaru, and Saken were surprised by the order, but they didn't dare to disobey his command. Despite his injuries, Enma got up and said resolutely, "You'll have to go through me." However, his feeble appearance wasn't enough to intimidate them. What worried them more was the ones chasing after them. Due to having used most of their chakra to sustain the barrier, all of them were on their last leg, and they were well aware that even if they were at their full strength, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Saken muttered, "This will be our last attack." Yukon chuckled and said, "Taking the life of the third Hokage and his powerful summon, that's not a bad way to go." Multi-leg hurricane jutsu, Teuya thought, "To think that I'll die in this shitty place. Who'd have thought that this old geezer still held such fearsome power?" Demon Flute, Trio Requiem, Kidomaru thought, "I never imagined that Orochimaru-sama could lose. Konoha, we completely underestimated them." Even if Kimimaro and the fourth Kazekage had participated, I don't think the result would have been any different. Directly attacking Konoha was a grave error. Spider Bow, Fierce Rip Jutsu, Wild Lion's Mane Jutsu, Wind Release, Vacuum Cluster Bullets Jutsu. Seeing the remaining members of the Sound 4 launching attacks at Enma and Hiruzen, Fujin and Jiraiya immediately acted. Despite having a lead over Fujin and Jiraiya, their attacks paled in terms of speed. Fujin's vacuum bullets pierced through the arrows shot by Kidomaru, destroying and diverting all of them. Moments later, they rampaged through the Doki summoned by Teuya, killing every single one of them. Finally, the vacuum bullets entered the hurricane surrounding Saken and Yukon. Normal air bullets and even vacuum bullets would have been diverted due to the winds of the hurricane. However, that didn't happen with Fujin's attack. Before either of them could realize it, several holes opened up in their weird body. Another member of the Sound 4 fell in Konoha. While Fujin directly countered their attacks, Jiraiya's hair extended towards Hiruzen and Enma, protecting both of them. With Jiraiya defending Hiruzen, Fujin focused entirely on the offense. Winds appeared from his wind cloak and several wind blades moved towards Teuya and Kidomaru. With nothing to hide behind, Teuya was defenseless. She immediately tried to summon another Doki to hide behind but failed to do so. She cursed, "Shit, I don't have any chak." Wind blades cut straight through her throat, beheading her on the spot. Dozens of wind blades also hit Kidomaru, but he protected himself by secreting sticky spider gold from his pores. Unfortunately, even that didn't buy him much time as a vacuum bullet pierced straight through the third eye on his forehead. Fujin didn't even glance at him and instead used his vacuum-gatling jutsu on Orochimaru. Orochimaru's expression was grim. He had already been on the receiving end of that jutsu once. In his current state, he had no chance of dodging the jutsu. Jiraiya noticed it as well and wondered, "Is this it for Orochimaru?" Chapter 749, Hiruzen's State. "Is this it, Orochimaru?" Jiraiya wondered, as Fujin's vacuum bullets were merely inches away from Orochimaru's body. Even though Jiraiya wasn't sure that such an attack could kill Orochimaru, he could sense the massive chakra Fujin was building up. He did not doubt that Fujin was going for the kill. However, just as the vacuum bullets were about to rip through him, Orochimaru disappeared. Fujin squinted his eyes and thought, as expected, he had already set up reverse summoning jutsu. However, he got very lucky with the timing. In his state, he couldn't have initiated it. If the person who used the jutsu had been a couple of seconds late, he'd be dead. In a base in the land of rice, Orochimaru appeared in front of Kimimaro and Jugo. Kimimaro's hand froze mid-air, the words caught in his throat, while Jugo's usually steady gaze flickered, both of them staring at Orochimaru as if they had just witnessed the impossible. Neither of them imagined that they'd ever see Orochimaru in such a terrible state. Finally, Kimimaro gathered himself and asked, "Orochimaru-sama, what happened in Konoha?" On the stadium rooftop, Jiraiya thought, "I should have expected as much." Fujin appeared next to Jiraiya and asked, "How's the old man?" Jiraiya's expression became grim. He replied, "I haven't taken a closer look yet, but he isn't good. His soul is almost completely shattered. It's a miracle that he's still alive." Fujin nodded. The sight of Hiruzen slashing his own soul was too shocking. After learning the spirit transformation jutsu, Fujin studied souls quite a bit. Even though he couldn't be compared to the likes of Orochimaru, Hiruzen, or Danzo in this aspect, he still knew a lot. A simple injury to the soul could end up destroying a person for good and put them in a vegetative state, if not kill them outright. In the rarest of cases where the person managed to live properly, they'd experience extreme pain until the soul was completely healed. The pain alone would exhaust the will to live of most people. Hiruzen's case was far more extreme. Fujin thought, "Even though I couldn't see the god of death, I saw Hiruzen's soul being extracted from his body. Only around a fifth of his soul returned to his body, and that too was cut hastily. To think that he is still alive." Fujin was feeling complicated. Initially, he was disturbed by the possibility of fate controlling everything and pushing the world in the same direction as the story he read. It had made him feel helpless, just like his clone. However, Hiruzen's unexpected move gave him some hope. As long as Hiruzen lived, it proved that the future wasn't set in stone. It wouldn't disprove fate's existence, but it at least meant that Fujin didn't need to worry about a transcendent force forcefully keeping certain events the same irrespective of what he did. Fujin, who once wished for things to remain the same, now wanted to save Hiruzen to see some change. Fujin immediately said, "I'll check up on him." While Fujin examined Hiruzen, two individuals regained control of their bodies. Since Kimimaro reverse summoned Orochimaru back to the land of rice, and his soul had been sliced and sealed by Hiruzen, he could no longer maintain his control over Rasa and Sakumo. Rasa looked around. Even though he couldn't control his actions, he had witnessed everything. He knew that Sunagakyo had lost the war horrendously. He had seen the dead bodies of his subordinates litter the arena. Never did he imagine that his war would leave his village in such a vulnerable position. He was filled with regret at having allied with Orochimaru. Unfortunately, he didn't have much time to introspect. Moments after he gained clarity, Ryu's wind breath reached him. He instinctively used the gold dust around him to create a barrier while he got out of the way. Unfortunately, he had too little time to react, and the amount of gold dust around him was too little. Ryu's wind breath tore through the gold barrier. Rasa couldn't get out of its way entirely, and nearly half of his body was decimated by the sharp wind blades. He couldn't help but wonder, first Fujin's ridiculous technique and now this. Why does Konoha have better wind jutsus than us? Suddenly, he heard a chuckle and glanced behind. Fujin's clone placed his hand on Rasa's back and asked, "Are you satisfied by the result of the war you started, 4th Kazekage?" To the surprise of Fujin's clone, Rasa asked, "What war? What happened here? Why are there so many dead bodies of my ninjas in Konoha?" For a moment, Fujin's clone was left speechless by Rasa's response. As he sealed Rasa, he thought, what a world! No matter whether someone is weak or strong, intelligent or dumb, old or young, everyone is fucking shameless. Had it been someone other than Fujin, they might have been fooled by Rasa's innocent reply. Perhaps they would assume that it was all Orochimaru's doing, and he controlled Suna through their dead 4th Kazekage. After Rasa was sealed, Fujin's clone thought, I guess Suna used this excuse in the original story too. It's too convenient not to use it. and since Konoha was severely hurt and was wary of other villages, they accepted it to maintain their alliance and keep Kumo at bay. I have a feeling that the council might accept this explanation once again, though they'll make Suna pay in some way. After all, Konoha had minimal losses. The only major loss is Hiruzen. Some distance away, the battle between Sakumo and Kakashi's group finally stopped. Renjiro glanced behind and said with a smile on his face, "They defeated Orochimaru." Sakumo nodded and replied, "Yes, but he got away. I can sense that he still has some influence on me, though it's minuscule." Renjiro said, "That's a shame. We'll have to seal you, Sakumo-sama." Kakashi wanted to talk more with his father, but he knew that it was time. Guy glanced at his rival to see how he was doing. To their surprise, Sakumo smiled and said, "There's no need." Sakumo's body started crumbling and his soul began leaving his body as he said, "I had several regrets when I died. However, I can finally move on. Thank you for forgiving me, Kakashi." Kakashi saw as his father's soul left his body before disappearing. He muttered, "Rest in peace, father." Unlike the Cages, who could still be reanimated like how Orochimaru reanimated the Hokages in the Fourth Great Ninja War, Sakumo could never be revived using the Edo Tensei Jutsu. Fujin examined Hiruzen's body thoroughly. Even though Hiruzen had taken a lot of injuries during his intense battle against Orochimaru and the reanimated Cages, the two main injuries were self-inflicted. The flames that had surrounded his body had burnt his skin in several parts of his body. In particular, the skin on his fists was completely burnt. While bad, it wasn't extremely serious. Fujin wasted no time in healing the damage caused by the flames and the other external wounds Hiruzen had taken. However, Hiruzen's main issue was his soul. Fujin muttered in surprise, "This is truly remarkable." Jiraiya asked, "What is it?" Fujin answered, "His soul. Even though it seemed like he cut it hastily, it doesn't seem to be the case. Despite having just a fifth of his soul, he has cut his soul in such a way that he can still live on." Jiraiya was surprised by Fujin's words. He thought, "Sensei took Minato's death harder than I thought. He must have been working on the Reaper death seal. I never thought that this jutsu could be used without sacrificing the entire soul. Regardless." Relief appeared on Jiraiya's face. He smiled and said, "So he'll make a recovery." Fujin shook his head and explained, "No, it's not that simple. Even though he has cut his soul in a way that wouldn't result in an instant death, his soul is too weak. He won't be able to wake up by himself." Fujin glanced at Jiraiya and added, "However, if someone heals his soul, then he might be able to wake up. I don't know any medical ninja in Konoha who can heal souls. However, since he went to this extent, I'm guessing she can do so." Jiraiya realized who Fujin was speaking of. He said, "Tsunade. Yes, she can do so." He thought, even though she can heal souls, it is extremely difficult even for her. She has never healed anyone whose soul was injured to this extent. Regardless, she is our only hope. Jiraiya asked, "Is he in any danger of dying?" Fujin replied in a sad tone, "I can't say for sure. He's stable for now, but I don't know what complications could arise. Perhaps the more experienced medical ninjas could have a better idea." Jiraiya nodded. Even though Fujin healed Hiruzen's external injuries very rapidly, Jiraiya knew that Fujin didn't have much experience in this field. The other Konoha ninjas began rushing towards the three of them. However, there was one group who didn't. All of them looked at the same spot and muttered in surprise, "Where is Kabuto's body?" Chapter 750, Aftermath. "Is Hokage-sama all right?" one of Hiruzen's Anbu guard asked. Several other Anbu and Jounins had appeared on the rooftop as well. Jiraiya answered, "He's fine for now, but needs to be checked upon urgently. Summon the best medical ninjas here." 3 Anbu guards nodded and flickered away. The last one stayed and asked, "What of the Suna ninjas who escaped earlier? Should we chase and hunt them down while they are in the land of fire?" Fujin answered, "No need. They have already lost their will. Chasing after them will just needlessly increase our casualties and spread our forces thin." The Anbu guard nodded and didn't ask anything else. Fujin thought, considering the situation, chasing and eliminating them now would be more beneficial for Konoha. It'd allow us to inflict the highest damage to Suna before the negotiations begin. Unfortunately, the words Fujin spoke weren't his own. It was what Shikaku and Hiruzen told everyone they shared their plans with. Unlike Fujin's Kumo mission, where he was tasked to kill as many Kumo ninjas as he could, their focus was exactly the opposite in this war. They wanted to keep the casualties to a minimum. While killing more enemies could send a strong message to other hidden villages, ensuring that Konoha stayed strong was a bigger deterrent to other villages. They didn't mind letting a few hundred enemies escape if it meant that fewer Konoha ninjas lost their lives. Of course, the circumstances were quite different from what they imagined. Suna's morale was truly shattered. If Fujin chased after them, he could annihilate their entire forces with little trouble. Even if they dispersed, Fujin could hunt most of them down before they could leave the land of fire. Fortunately for the Suna ninjas, Fujin didn't have anything to gain by doing so. Hence, he just followed Shikaku's plan. Other ninjas soon came to check up on Hiruzen. Realizing how serious Hiruzen's situation was, the atmosphere became solemn. The morale that was high due to Fujin's actions finally began dying down as the war was finally over. Even so, many ninjas looked at Fujin respectfully, something that didn't escape Jiraiya's eyes. Jiraiya analyzed, "I had sensed Sakumo-sen's presence earlier. In addition, Orochimaru likely had Sensei trapped inside the barrier since the start. Considering how important the battles here were, this place should have been attacked the most. Yet there isn't a single enemy ninja here. This boy probably did a remarkable job to ensure complete victory here. No wonder they're looking at him with such admiration in their eyes." Soon, senior medical ninjas arrived and began examining Hiruzen. At the same time, a Jounin flickered next to Fujin and said in a soft voice, "Councilman Fujin, the box in which you sealed Kabuto suddenly disappeared." A frown immediately appeared on Fujin's face. He asked, "What do you mean by disappeared? Did anyone see where it went?" The Jounin replied with a hint of embarrassment, "We momentarily looked at the barrier when you destroyed it. When we looked back, the box was missing." Seeing Fujin deep in thoughts, Hoka asked, "Do you think it was Orochimaru?" Fujin replied, "Yeah, most likely. I guess whoever reverse-summoned Orochimaru also reverse-summoned Kabuto. Still, it's strange for such importance to be given to a dead subordinate." Kakashi added, "He wasn't an ordinary subordinate. I guess Orochimaru still has some use for him even though he is dead. With the Edo Tensei Jutsu, he can still make use of him." Fujin nodded and asked, "What about the others I sealed?" The Jounin quickly answered, "They're still here." Fujin replied, "All right, no need to worry about it anymore. Attend to the injured ninjas. Your group suffered the most due to Kabuto." The Jounin nodded and quickly flickered away. Soon after, Hiruzen was taken to the hospital, and other medical ninjas began attending to injured Konoha ninjas. Naruto and Gaara's battle wrapped up as well. Just like in the original story, Naruto defeated Gaara and used his strongest jutsu on him before Temari and Kankuro could take him away. The only change from the original story was that Shibai wasn't free to come to his son's rescue. Shikaku had assigned him to deal with one of the 8 groups that attacked the village. However, Shino was still rescued by an older Aburame Jounin. Fujin's clone secretly kept an eye until the group returned to the village. For the next few hours, Konoha became extremely busy. Shikaku deployed teams to analyze their losses. The hospital overflowed with injured ninjas. Announcements were made to calm the civilians who were in panic, and the perimeters of the village were once again secured. Finally, the leaders of the village gathered in Konoha's council room. However, there were a few noticeable things in the council. Hiruzen was missing for obvious reasons, while neither Danzo nor Jiraiya showed up for the meeting. Fujin thought, so Danzo chose to hide his face. Understandable, as his absence in the war would have been questioned if he showed up here. Even though this could have been a chance for him to put his name up for the next Hokage, he is far behind Jiraiya and Tsunade in this race. Fujin couldn't help but find it amusing that Tsunade, someone who hadn't been in the village for over a decade, had better qualifications for the seat of the Hokage than Danzo, someone who lived in the village and continuously schemed. The silence was broken by Hamura, who cursed, "Those bloody fools! To think they'd ally with Orochimaru and attack us! They nearly broke the delicate balance of the shinobi world and almost plunged the world into the 4th Great Ninja War." Shikaku added, "Fortunately, we were prepared. Otherwise, the situation would have been far worse." Hayashi asked, "What is the status of our losses other than Lord Third?" Shikaku pushed some papers ahead and answered, "Even though we faced a deadly attack, our losses are minimal for a battle of this scale. In the arena, where the most critical battles took place, we lost 37 ninjas and 84 civilians. By comparison, Sunagakure lost 377 ninjas, while Otagakure ninjas were completely wiped out. In addition to the battle in the arena, they attacked our village from 8 more directions. All 8 attacking groups were wiped out. There were no civilian casualties as none of them reached deep into the village, but 58 ninjas sacrificed their lives to stop them, mostly due to being caught off guard by the giant snakes. In all, we lost 21 Jounins, 62 Chunins, and 12 Genins along with 84 civilians. There are several more injured, but very few are in a serious condition. Sunagakure lost 625 ninjas in total, while Otagakure lost 307 ninjas. I suspect that these are over half of the forces Orochimaru controlled before he started the war. It might even exceed 75%. The number surprised almost everyone in the room. While they had overwhelming victories on their battlefield, they didn't think it'd be the same case everywhere. After all, the attack was truly powerful. Several council members glanced at Fujin, By now, they knew about the events in the arena and how easily Fujin had cut down the enemy numbers. Over a third of the dead ninjas were cut down by Fujin alone. Most still had a hard time believing how much of an impact Fujin had on the war. Fujin ignored their glances and asked, "So, what's next? How do we deal with Sunagakure and Otagakure?" Koharu replied, "If the fourth Kazekage were still alive, we'd have very little choice other than retaliating. However, he died even before the invasion. Sunagakure will claim that they were fooled by Orochimaru and remove the blame from their head. They'll use the death of their kage during negotiations, and we can use it to our advantage." Hiramasa added, "That is obvious. However, Sunagakure has crossed a line this time around. Even though they have heavy losses, we'll look weak if our allies are left scot-free after stabbing us in the back. In the future, our other allies might be emboldened to do the same." Hamura sighed and said, "That is true. I propose we send an army to the land of rice and wipe out all of Orochimaru's bases in that country once our wounded are healed. Since he is weakened by Hiruzen, we may have a chance of killing him for good. As for Sunagakure, we'll make them pay up." Inoichi asked, "Pay up what? They are already poor. With the fourth Kazekage dead, they can't even mine gold any longer. We already made them give their wind jutsu collection in the previous Great War." Koharu replied, "They still have mastery in creating and controlling puppets. We can force them to hand us their knowledge about the same." The council immediately began discussing what they could make Suna pay. However, Fujin was slightly confused. He asked, "I don't understand. Suna is weak right now. Their kage has died and they don't have anyone strong enough to replace him. Why don't we just attack Sunagakure and return the favor?" Chapter 751, Fifth Hokage. Why don't we just attack Sunagakure and make them pay the consequences of attacking Konoha? Fujin's question silenced the room in an instant. Without exception, every single council member stared at him. None of them expected him to say such a thing. Shikaku sighed internally. "This boy. He'll be at peace only when I have worked to death. I should have forced Jirya to attend the meeting." Hiramasa chuckled internally and thought, "Considering how terrifying his power is, I forgot that he's still just a child. As always, youngsters are hot-headed. Regardless, this is a good opportunity to guide him. It'd be a shame if he ended up following Danzo's footsteps." At the same time, Koharu wondered, why are he and Danzo at odds? He's more similar to Danzo than to Hiruzen. Is this why Hiruzen guided him so much? Hamura broke the silence and answered, "Fujin, a war is easy to start but very difficult to end. Once you ride the tiger, you can't get off easily. If Hiruzen was here, he'd have said the same. Sunagakure isn't a place that can be attacked on a whim. The land of wind is full of deserts. It is very easy to defend and extremely difficult to attack. The desert won't provide us with any resting spots. We'll be out in the open while the Suna ninjas lay traps on our routes. They'll set countless ambushes to attack us. Even though the ambushers will die, it'll slowly but steadily slow down our forces and erode our morale. Combined with the frequent sandstorms in the desert, we'll lose a large number of ninjas despite the absence of rank S ninjas in Sunagakure. Hence, attacking Sunagakure is very unwise. If we make one bad move, we can change our overwhelming victory into a disastrous defeat." Before Fujin could respond, Hiramasa added, "Even if you assume that we could push through their traps and ambushes and reach Sunagakure before crushing them, you have to see what our gains and losses would be. We'd lose thousands of capable ninjas and gain barren deserts in exchange for it. What are we supposed to do with those barren deserts? Even though they have some resources, they aren't much considering how much Suna is struggling financially. In addition, defending the land of wind from Konoha will be a difficult job unless we can double the number of our shinobis in the blink of an eye. In the next Great War, it'll become an easy target for Kirigakure and Iwagakure." Koharu quickly added, "Don't forget about Iwagakure and Kumagakure. Even though Kumagakure took heavy losses recently, they still have a very strong force. Our actions of destroying Sunagakure would alarm them. Both of them will immediately attack us to prevent Konoha from gaining a lot of new territories. We'll be attacked from all sides while our main forces are in the land of wind. You can analyze how dire our circumstances will be then." Fujin shrugged and asked, "Who talked about sending thousands of ninjas to the land of wind? All we need to do is send a few elite teams. Their western part is still quite unstable. All we have to do is pour some oil on it and watch what they do. Considering their losses, they'd hide in their village. However, once they are in danger of losing a part of their country, they'll have to make a decision. Whether to let go of their western part or deploy ninjas to control the situation there, both are beneficial for us. In the first case, we could create a new country and secretly fund it to create a new front for Suna and perhaps even Iwa in the future. Since it'll be so far from us, they'll be our perfect allies. In the second case, our elite units could just ambush and hunt their ninjas down, giving us the advantage of the terrain. As long as we keep doing it for some time, Suna will explode from the inside. The council grew silent once again. Previously, the three eldest council members were trying to educate their youngest member. However, Fujin immediately put up a strategy that was not only feasible but would make experienced schemers proud. Except for Shikaku, no one on the council expected Fujin to say something of this sort. Hayashi's expression became serious as he wondered, this boy, he was able to think of this on his own despite never having been in a major war. Hiramasa thought, I underestimated the boy. No wonder Hiruzen forced him upon the council. It was more than just due to his potential. Hamura was tongue-tied. He thought, I thought threatening like a lunatic was all he could do. It seems he also has a good mind for strategy. Still, for him to be so clear of the situation there, he must have been involved in those bizarre incidents in the Land of Wind all those years ago. Unfortunately, Hiruzen kept his lips sealed. Others in the room had similar thoughts. Luckily, the civilian members weren't present, or they would have been terrified by the deadly scheme Fujin presented so easily. However, even though they were surprised by Fujin's strategy, what surprised them more was that Fujin thought of it instead of the strategy itself. In fact, many in the room had already thought of Fujin's idea. It's just that they didn't see it to be beneficial for Konoha. In truth, Fujin knew that it wouldn't help Konoha much either. Even though Suna had been an unreliable ally and his strategy would reduce their strength to the point that they could no longer be considered a great village, it would make all the other hidden villages wary of Konoha. Not to mention, Fujin knew that Suna would become a very strong ally of Konoha in the future, so such a step was unnecessary and wasteful. However, Fujin had just been given a scare by fate a few hours ago. As such, he was looking forward to making some mess. Seeing that none of the council members seemed aboard with his plan, Fujin added, of course, that's just one way. We could also do a full-fledged assault by allying with Iwagakure. After all, since Suna allied with Orochimaru, there's no reason why we can't ally with Iwagakure, even though we'll have to split the... Shikaku suddenly coughed to cut Fujin off. He said, Fujin, while both of your methods are feasible, we shouldn't lose sight of what's the most important. Since we were attacked, Iwagakure and Kumagakure would start trying to see how much damage we took. We have to be more wary of any sudden movements from them instead of spreading ourselves thin by attacking Sunagakure. Not to mention, Lord Third is in a coma. The village cannot be without a leader for a long time. We need to make a decision. As he spoke, Shikaku's attention turned towards the door, which opened almost immediately. An ambush squad watched as the daimyo and the civilian council members entered the room. Shikaku sighed in relief and thought, luckily they arrived quickly. It'd be very troublesome if Fujin convinced some of the members. Sigh, this boy still has no filter. Fujin noticed Shikaku's relief and cursed, that lazy bum. So this was the signal he sent earlier. He just wants to avoid work. HMPH, didn't he die 4 years later in the original story? I'm not sure if he'll still end up dead, but I'll make sure that he does the work for the next 40 years in the next 4 years. If he survives, then he can just retire. While Shikaku was happy to see the daimyo, he was blissfully unaware of the never-ending headaches that would soon start flowing towards him. The fire daimyo took his seat, sighed, and muttered, what a terrible day! To think that Orochimaru and Sunagakure would ally and attack Konoha during the Chunin exam. They even targeted the officials and the civilians. How are the Hokage's injuries? Koharu answered. He is in a coma but is stable. Unfortunately, we aren't sure when he'll wake up. The fire daimyo replied, it's good that he made it through alive. However, the other villages will be looking at Konoha like vultures. If the village has no leader, it could spell trouble. Unlike the daimyo and the civilian members, the others weren't that worried about any possible moves from other great villages. Suna had just lost their cage and taken a brutal beating. Kiri was still embroiled in a civil war. Kumo had lost nearly 1,000 elite ninjas and were facing internal struggles, while Iwa's intelligence network had been almost entirely annihilated. As such, none of them were in a position to act quickly. More importantly, Konoha's losses were minimal. Even if Kumo decided to surprise Konoha and make a move, they had sufficient confidence to give Kumo a bloody nose and deter any other village from having similar thoughts. Since no one opposed him, the fire daimyo looked at the members and asked, so who'll be the fifth Hokage? Chapter 752, Fujin, the fifth Hokage. Whoa, why is there a bloody mess here? Naruto exclaimed while looking at the gore left behind by the explosion of 2 giant snakes outside Fujin's compound. After returning, Naruto entered the hospital like most of his comrades. Unlike them, he was discharged within an hour. Yuji cheekily replied, they were 2 giant snakes, you should have seen them. They bared their fangs and hissed viciously as they slithered towards our compounds. However, a single glance from Sensei's clone made them go boom. Naruto looked at him and asked, "Huh, how did they explode just by the big brother's gaze?" Yuji shrugged and answered, "How would I know that? Sensei is too mysterious." Naruto looked at Yuji with a deadpan expression. Sayaka said, "Yuji, stop fooling around. Naruto, they were dealt with by Sensei's Fuinjutsu. I'll explain." In the council room, the fire daimyo glanced at everyone after asking his question. After Minato's death, Konoha hadn't appointed the fifth Hokage as Hiruzen took the reins once again. However, he was growing old rapidly. The severe injury raised huge doubts about his ability to lead Konoha again. Even though the fire daimyo wasn't sure about the level of Hiruzen's injuries, the fact that no one opposed him made him realize their severity. He thought, his injuries must be far more severe than they let us believe. I hope Konoha has enough strength. If the next great war begins, we'll lose all the progress we made once again. Once again, Hamura broke the silence and said, "There isn't much to consider. We have several capable ninjas. There is only one who is suitable for the role of fifth Hokage right now. I propose we make Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, the fifth Hokage." Koharu added, "I agree. Jiraiya's combat prowess has long been proven. He made several contributions during the Second and Third Great Ninja Wars and is the student of the third Hokage and the teacher of the fourth Hokage. Every Konoha ninja respects him while enemy villages fear him." Everyone in the room subconsciously nodded. There weren't any doubts about Jiraiya's capability. The only question that most wondered was whether Jiraiya would accept the seat or not. After all, it was well known that Hiruzen had long wanted Jiraiya to succeed him, but Jiraiya always declined the seat. Even though no one opposed it, the fire daimyo didn't make any announcement and instead looked at Fujin. To everyone's surprise, he said, "While I was outside, I kept hearing about a mighty youngster who turned the tides of the war single-handedly several times. Almost every Konoha ninja is speaking of you, Suzuki Fujin. I suspect so will everyone in Sunagakure. Would you like to become the fifth Hokage?" For the first time, every clan leader's and elder's gaze became sharp. The civilian council members became slightly nervous, but didn't show it on their faces. The fire daimyo was unbothered by their gazes and continued looking at Fujin. Shikaku squinted his eyes and analyzed. "Is he trying to sow discord? No, he should know that wouldn't work. In that case, his goal must be—" Inoichi glanced at Fujin with curiosity in his eyes. He wondered, to get an offer to become the fifth Hokage directly from the fire daimyo. Tempting, especially for his age. However, I have never seen him act like a teenager. This should be interesting. I wonder if he'll fall for it. The others had similar thoughts as Inoichi. They wondered how Fujin would respond. More importantly, they wanted to see what Fujin's ambitions were. With the strength and intelligence Fujin displayed and how invested Hiruzen was in him, they knew that Fujin would be a sure candidate for the Hokage in the future. However, they weren't sure whether Fujin would compete with Jiraiya over the seat of the fifth Hokage or wait patiently for his turn. Fujin was confused by the sudden offer. He thought, what the hell? Since when did Daimyo get the power to choose who the next Hokage would be? Is it the civilian council members? Thoughts flashed quickly in Fujin's mind as he analyzed. No, they don't get a vote in choosing the Hokage either. That right is reserved for the Joe. Oh, I see. Tusk, it's so simple, as expected of a daimyo. Fujin smiled and replied, "As tempting as that offer is, I would have to pass upon it. I wouldn't know the first thing that a Hokage is supposed to do. Lord Jiraiya would be far more suitable than me." Even though there was a smile on his face, Fujin was cursing internally. Old fox! He just wants to curry some favor with me since I'd be the likely candidate for Hokage in the future. Luckily, I have no interest in that position beyond getting access to that scroll and any other forbidden techniques Hiruzen is keeping hidden. Otherwise, I'd have been in a spot of bother. Needless to say, if Fujin had agreed, he'd have put himself against the council. Not only would he not become the Hokage as he'd not have the votes, but it'd also show his impatience to be the next Hokage, something that would have been detrimental to him had he actually wanted to become one. As such, the fire daimyo wasn't just trying to curry favor, but also wanted to gauge Fujin's character. Fujin's reply caused several of the council members to analyze him. Hiramasa thought, as expected of Renjiro's student. Even if he wants to become the Hokage, he understands that now isn't the time to bicker. Besides, Jiraiya might just pass on the hat when he is ready. Sum wondered. Interesting. However, is he really not in a hurry to become the Hokage, or did he just spot the trap? His reply wasn't immediate, which means he analyzed the offer a bit. Inoichi thought, even if he spotted the trap, it displays his intelligence even further. That is a necessity to become a Hokage. It'll be very difficult for others to compete with him for the position of the sixth Hokage. Though Kakashi had fair bit of a lead over others, Fujin far exceeds him in raw strength, and his strength is still growing steadily and rapidly. Hamura nodded approvingly, and so did Koharu despite her issues with Fujin. Only one person had different thoughts. Shikaku looked at Fujin and thought, of course, he'd decline. Seeing that he shows up less than once a week to his office, I suspect he'll decline it even in the future. He is far more interested in causing trouble than doing the work to fix any problems. While Shikaku knew that Fujin couldn't be called lazy, he understood that Fujin had little interest in administration and establishing influence. Even though he had a seat in the council and was building up a new faction inside Konoha, both were things that Hiruzen forced upon him. In fact, Fujin had outrightly refused the second. However, the others in the council weren't entirely sure of it. The fire daimyo smiled and said, "All right, since no one opposes Jirya, I'll appoint him as the acting Hokage. He'll take over all the duties of the Hokage. Considering the situation, there is no need to hurry with the voting. Do it when things calm down." Everyone agreed. The council discussed a few more topics, including the financial aspects. Due to Shikaku's plans, Konoha didn't suffer much structural damage. The gigantic snake had caused the village wall to collapse in 8 different spots, but it wasn't much. Only 2 of the 8 units managed to break through the wall, but neither could enter the village. Hence, the damage was minimal. Since the financial demand wasn't much, the fire daimyo agreed to bear all of it without much argument. After discussing other topics for around an hour, the fire daimyo finally took his leave. Shikaku glanced at the civilian council members and said, "You guys can leave as well." Hearing the seriousness in his tone, none of them argued. Once again, only ninjas remained in the council room. Without a hint of laziness on his face, Shikaku said, "Now that the civilian aspects are dealt with, we need to address the military aspect. First, we need Lord Third to recover and wake up. The only one who can heal his soul is Lady Tsunade. Unfortunately, we have no idea where she is. Lord Jirya has already agreed to find and bring her back. He wants to take Naruto with him to find her." Koharu squinted her eyes and said, "The Jinchuriki, why him?" Shikaku shrugged and answered, "No idea. I guess he wants to train Naruto, considering that he trained him for the finals of the Chunin exam." Hamura thought and said, "That is fine. He won't be in any danger with Jirya looking over him. However," Shikaku completed his sentence, "we have to convince Lord Jirya to accept the position of the 5th Hokage. While I'd have liked to help, I don't think a junior convincing him would work. I hope you two can convince him to do so." Hamura and Koharu nodded and replied, "All right." Shikaku replied, "Good, we'll leave it to you. That brings us to the second point." Shikaku's gaze turned towards Fujin as he spoke. Chapter 753, The New Successor. Shikaku wasn't the only one. The 2 elders also gazed at Fujin. Fujin immediately wondered, what are these old geezers scheming? Did they meet up before the council met? Hamura looked at Fujin and thought, before this time, this role belonged to Kakashi since he was expected to lead the next generation. However, Hiruzen specifically passed this responsibility to Fujin before the war even started. I didn't agree with the decision then, but I now understand why he did so. From today on, it is official that Hiruzen prefers Fujin over Kakashi as the next candidate for the Hokage seat. Shikaku said, "Even though our losses are low, the other villages will be curious about our state. Since we wiped out the spy network of Kumigakure and Iwagakure, they won't know that we are all right. In addition, the minor villages that are allied with us will be concerned as well. Even if Iwa and Kumo don't dare to make a move against us, they can use this attack to scare the minor villages and tempt them to betray us and ally with them instead. Though it won't affect us much in the short term, it could be troublesome if everyone switches sides. So we need to send a message across that Konoha is still as powerful as ever." Fujin immediately realized, "So that's why they were staring at me. Sai, I shouldn't have shown off so much. Unfortunately, it's too late now." Shikaku smiled and said, "The main reason why our losses were so low is you, Fujin. Without you, our losses in the arena would have been very heavy. In the worst case, we could even have lost. I have to admit that I didn't think Orochimaru could revive the dead Kage with so much strength. Orochimaru outplayed me with that move. Fortunately, you and Lord Third dealt with his cards. As a result, everyone in Konoha is looking up to why." Fujin cut him off and casually asked, "Just tell me who we are targeting. Is it Iwagakure or is it Kumigakure?" Fujin's abrupt interruption caught Shikaku off guard. What surprised him even more were Fujin's words. For a moment he forgot to breathe and began coughing roughly while thinking, "This brat, does he always have to go all the way? We were just talking about how Iwa and Kumo could be a problem and he wants to go and poke them." Others had similar thoughts as they hadn't seen this side of Fujin. However, they didn't have the information that Shikaku did. He fully knew that Fujin could single-handedly start a war if he was let loose. If Suna or Kumo had any proof of his actions in their countries, both would have long launched an all-out war against Konoha. As such, they weren't aware of the weight of Fujin's words and assumed that he was taking them lightly. Shikaku finally caught his breath and said, "No, we won't be targeting anyone." Lord Third had already decided to give you 3,000 ninjas to lead once the war was over. Take them away from Konoha and march around the Land of Fire for a bit. Fujin nodded while thinking, so they finally gave me this role. I remember that Hiruzen made Kakashi lead such armies after I pulled that stunt in the Land of Wind, and after I clashed with Kitsuchi in the Land of Waterfall. Shikaku continued. Due to the possibility of Suna's and Orochimaru's attack, I had recalled most of our ninjas back to the village. Their absence and the fact that we were just attacked would tempt bandits and rogue ninjas to try their luck. Your job will have multiple objectives. The first and the most important one is to have the army conduct war exercises. It'll send a message to other villages while preparing our forces at the same time and giving you some experience in leading large forces. I'll send Renjiro with you to help you. The second is to eliminate all bandits and rogue ninjas in the vicinity of the army. In addition, I'll directly transfer any elimination missions that we receive that are in your vicinity to your army. You can send appropriate squads to eliminate them. If you are close to the border area, then I'll also send missions that are from the neighboring countries. Once you are done marching around the Land of Fire, lead the army to the vicinity of the Fire capital. Our negotiations with Sunagakure will take place there. You'll be a part of the negotiating team as well, and though I said we won't target anyone, feel free to eliminate a few of Orochimaru's bases in the Land of Rice when you're close to that border. Shikaku's words surprised others in the room. Inoichi wondered, only a few. Even though we can't target Sunagakure much due to the terrain, targeting Otagakure isn't difficult. The only risk in attacking them is Orochimaru's sneak attacks. However, since he is so badly injured, we don't need to worry about that much. What is Shikaku planning? Others had similar thoughts. What they didn't know was that Shikaku knew Fujin's understanding of the few was different from others. If it hadn't been for the fact that Orochimaru had just attacked Konoha and nearly killed Hiruzen, Shikaku would have felt some pity for the former Konoha ninja. Fujin thought, that isn't very troublesome. Though I had a few things to work on, I guess that can wait. Leading 3,000 ninjas. That should be fun. But, Fujin replied, all right, I should be able to do that. However, is it okay for both Lord Jirya and me to be outside the village at the same time? Shikaku replied, it's fine. None of the other villages will make a move so quickly and Orochimaru is heavily injured. Eagle is focusing entirely on Lord Third's safety, while we still have Kakashi and Guy in the village in case something unexpected happens. Fujin nodded while thinking, I guess even he can't anticipate that Itachi and Kisame would show up in the village. A shame that I won't be here. Fighting them would have been fun. I wonder how effective my wind domain would be against the Sasano. Fujin's wind domain was extremely deadly for anyone within its range. An almost exhausted wind domain had completely suppressed Kaguya Shirogane, a rank S ninja with an excellent defense. However, Sasano was one defense that Fujin wasn't too confident of cracking, at least not with the current level of the wind domain. Fujin turned his gaze back to Shikaku and thought, anyway. A glint appeared in Fujin's eyes, making Shikaku nervous. Fujin said, you missed 1 point, Shikaku-san. Shikaku nervously asked, what is it? Fujin answered, as the fire daimyo said, we can't be without a leader at such a time. Since Lord Jirya would be away until he returns with Lady Tsunade, we'll need someone else to act as the acting Hokage until then. Considering how involved you are with everything that happens in the village and how you're the person we depend on the most in times of crisis, I propose that you take over that role. A dumbfounded expression appeared on Shikaku's face. Before he had any opportunity to argue, Fujin glanced at the other council members and asked, what do you guys think? I'm sure Lord Jirya wouldn't have an issue with this. Without missing a beat, Tsum replied with a grin, I agree. A fraction of a second later, Inoichi added, same here. Hamura smiled and replied, that's a very good proposal, I agree. In just a couple of seconds, every council member agreed while Shikaku saw it happen with the same dumbfounded expression. Despite his intelligence, he couldn't stop it from happening. He finally opened his mouth to protest, but Choza patted his back before a single word escaped Shikaku's mouth and said, we'll be in your care, Shikaku. Shikaku looked at the smile on Fujin's face and thought, this brat, he must have seen me popping that communication seal to inform the Ambu ninjas to send the daimyo in. Damn it! Shikaku immediately regretted not being more stealthy while doing so. He still wanted to oppose, but a few others got up from their seats and wished him good luck. Knowing how lazy he was, no one gave him a chance to decline. Fujin got up as well and said, I'll be at my home, Shikaku-san. Send a messenger for me when the army is ready to move. Since everything had been discussed, the council meeting finally ended. Everyone left, leaving a speechless Shikaku alone in the room. Fujin flickered a few times and reached his house. Without wasting any time, he entered the basement and asked, so, did you get it? Chapter 754, Conducting an Experiment. Even after Orochimaru was defeated, Fujin couldn't return to his house. As one of the strongest ninjas and a member of Konoha's council, he couldn't just retire to his house after such a huge attack. Fortunately, he didn't have many responsibilities as a council member. While Hiruzen had plans to give Fujin several responsibilities over time, he postponed his plans due to how rarely Fujin visited his office. Hence, while other council members continued working even after the meeting, Fujin returned to his house without any worries. "So, did you get it?" Fujin asked as soon as he entered his basement. In front of him was his shadow clone who was keeping an eye on Naruto and Gaara. Next to the clone was a pot and a large box. Needless to say, the large box was where Kabuto was sealed. As soon as the ninjas around the sealed Kabuto were distracted by the fall of the barrier, the clone, who was initially keeping an eye on Sakumo, teleported the box to his basement. His timing was so perfect that not a single ninja realized what had happened. As for why he did so, it was rather simple. Even though Kabuto was dead, Fujin didn't want any accidents that could see him revived again, whether temporarily or permanently. In addition, he also didn't want to see Danzo getting his hands on the box and unsealing Kabuto to get more intel about Orochimaru and his experiments. Not only could that strengthen Danzo, but it would also cause Danzo to become suspicious about Kabuto's death. Even though there wasn't anything linking his death to Fujin, someone like Danzo would definitely feel suspicious. While Fujin no longer cared about Danzo or his actions, it would be a bit troublesome if other leaders in Konoha began suspecting him as well. Fujin's clone grinned and replied, "Of course." He dispelled in a cloud of smoke, sending memories back to Fujin, who thought, "So, even the battle between Naruto and Gaara was almost identical to the original story. Sigh, whatever. I have checked Hiruzen thoroughly, he won't succumb to his injuries. As long as he lives, it proves that the future isn't set in stone. I suppose this is just the result of my wanting to keep the events as similar to the original story. Even though my influence surpassed my calculations and caused several changes, it wasn't high enough to change the future drastically. Perhaps, if I had shown off my Flying Thunder God Jutsu, Suna would have directly backed off. Regardless, with Kabuto dead and Hiruzen alive, the future will be quite different. I am not sure how much strength Hiruzen would retain, but as long as he retains some, he'll be feared due to the Reaper Death Seal, irrespective of whether he can use it or not. Along with my existence, it would be too foolish for Nagato and Konan to attack Konoha by themselves. Sigh, what a waste! That would have been a great opportunity to kill Konan and steal Nagato's Rinnegan before Abaido could make a move. Oh well, since I won't be able to benefit from it any longer, I don't need to be too constrained with my actions. It's time to let loose." Fujin chuckled as he stored Kabuto's box before turning his gaze towards the pot which contained Shukaku's chakra. Fujin analyzed, even though my clone absorbed chakra from Shukaku's entire arm, he didn't get much chakra. This pot has around 5% of Shukaku's chakra. It should be enough for my plans, but there's no harm if I can increase it. Time for my first experiment. Due to the memories of his previous life, Fujin's knowledge of tailed beasts far exceeded normal ninjas. He had information that even the cages didn't possess. In addition, he had accessed most of Konoha's research on tailed beasts and also had significant information about the experiments conducted by other villages due to memories of the countless dead ninjas he read. Hence, before he implemented his plan, he wanted to conduct an experiment. Fujin thought a tailed beast is quite an interesting phenomenon. Even though the 9-tailed beasts were formed from the 10 tails, the 10 tails itself was a product of this planet's energy. Hence, whenever a tailed beast is killed, its chakra disperses back into nature, allowing it to reform and revive after some time. I suppose Hagoromo might have something to do with it, but it uses nature as a medium regardless of what mechanisms he created. This raises one question. Since a tailed beast's rebirth takes energy from nature, can I use that energy to increase the amount of Shukaku's chakra I have? Or does every tailed beast have a finite amount of chakra? Fujin didn't have much information in this regard, as there weren't many cases where a tailed beast was cut up. Juki's tentacles were frequently cut by the third Reikage, but Juki always took his tentacles back later. Kumo didn't use the tentacles to form any pseudo-Jinchurikis, as they were worried that it could ruin any chances of cooperating with the tailed beast. Minato split Kurama into half, but both halves were quickly sealed up, one in Minato and the other in Naruto. Similarly, the tentacle bee used to fool Sasuke was quickly sealed too, not giving them time to grow. Fujin only had 2 cases that could be used. The first was the Gold and Silver brothers. Both had consumed Kurama's flesh and gained a bit of his chakra. Unfortunately, Fujin wasn't sure whether the chakra inside them grew later, but he had a feeling that happened considering the amount of Kurama's chakra they possessed. The second case where that did happen was Sora, who was shown in a filler arc. In fact, that was the main inspiration for Fujin. However, a helpless chuckle escaped Fujin's lips. He thought, ever since I had this idea, I wanted to see that boy to check how feasible it would be. He could have also been an easy way to access Kurama's chakra. Unfortunately, he doesn't exist. Not only did Fujin not find any such boy, there was no record of any temples being destroyed in the recent past. As such, Fujin was more or less certain that no one tried to make a pseudo-Jinchuriki with Kurama's chakra. Fujin muttered, "Oh well, there's always the first time," while continuously inscribing new seals on the pot containing Shukaku's chakra. After a few minutes, Fujin was finally done. He observed the pot and thought, yeah, this should do. Even though Shukaku isn't here, his chakra is still berserk. But it won't be able to break through the pot now even if it suddenly quadrupled in strength. Yet my seals allow the chakra to interact normally with the outside world, so it can grow by absorbing whatever it absorbs. If my speculations are right, it should grow rapidly initially. However, its growth would slow down as it grows. After all, it can't grow into a new-tailed beast or the world would have been destroyed a long time ago. Anyway, let me see how much it grows, if at all. I can't wait too long, maybe a month at most. Then I'll absorb it into my new seal. Speaking of which, it's time to use this seal on me finally. Fujin took off his flak jacket, shirt, and chainmail as a new seal imprint appeared on his left hand. Without wasting a moment, he placed it on his own abdomen. While Fujin was busy in his basement, Hamura and Koharu met Jiraiya and informed him what had happened in the council meeting before telling him that he would be the fifth Hokage. Just like the original story, he refused and recommended appointing Tsunade instead. Hamura and Koharu didn't care which Sannin sat on the seat as long as it was one of them. Hamura replied, "If you can convince her, then we have no issues. However, if you fail to do so, you have to accept the position of the Hokage. We don't have anyone else suitable for that position for the time being." Jiraiya didn't reply as he was well aware of Konoha's situation. In addition, he was confident of convincing Tsunade. Just like in the original story, he took Naruto with him by promising to teach him a jutsu cooler than Chidori. Around the same time, Shikaku dejectedly walked to his office, still sighing about the huge job Fujin dumped on his head. As soon as he reached his office, his eyes widened. Several ninjas were carrying stacks of paperwork to his office while others were hurriedly leaving to bring back more. Shikaku cursed under his breath, "That cursed brat, don't tell me!" He quickly picked up the pace and entered his office. However, his steps faltered and he became still like a statue, with one foot inside his office and the other outside. His face became as white as the countless piles of white paper he saw. Chapter 755, The Path to Surpass Rank S. While the Suna ninjas were scurrying back to their village and Konoha worked on dealing with the aftermath of the assault, Fujin stood still in his basement. A huge seal was visible on his abdomen, where Fujin had placed his left palm. The seal suddenly began expanding, covering Fujin's entire body in the blink of an eye. Countless symbols crawled on Fujin's body for half a minute before calming down and disappearing into his body. Fujin took a deep breath and muttered, "Here goes nothing." He closed his eyes and completely stabilized his chakra. In a few seconds, not a single chakra fluctuation could be detected from Fujin. He stood still just like a statue. A few seconds later, Fujin opened his eyes. Surprise appeared on his face as he exclaimed, "Ha!" For a moment, Fujin couldn't see anything, for he was standing in a pitch-black darkness. Chakra gathered in his eyes and flowed out of his chakra points as the area was lit with his chakra. Fujin glanced below and chuckled, "So this is my inner world." What Fujin was seeing was no longer the real world, but his inner world. It was a space similar to the one where Kurama was sealed inside Naruto. However, there were more than a few differences between them. Fujin was standing on a cliff, and a step in front of him was a pitch-black valley. He couldn't see the bottom of it. Fujin glanced behind him and observed the scenery behind him. Unlike the deep valley in front of him, there was hard ground behind him. The area looked like a flat mountain top. Fujin spent a couple of minutes walking around the area. There wasn't much to observe as it was just a plain mountaintop. There was only one distinct feature. Fujin walked to the center of the mountaintop and stood on the edge of a lake, or rather, a large pit as the lake was empty. Fujin thought, "I see, I didn't imagine my creation would look like this. However, I understand. This would suit me perfectly, especially." Fujin glanced up above. There was no sky in his inner world, but if one were to observe carefully, they'd notice a transparent sphere floating some distance above the lake. The reason why it was hard to spot was because the sphere was completely empty. Yet, a glint appeared in Fujin's eyes as he observed the sphere carefully. That inconspicuous sphere was the main part of Fujin's seal. The barrier that made the sphere was extremely strong. According to Fujin's calculations, even a complete 9 tails wouldn't have any chance of breaking it. As for the 10 tails, Fujin wasn't sure. Fujin muttered, "I'll call the seal the Myriad Tetragram Seal, a seal made by an outrageous combination of 16 four-symbol seals overlapped in an almost impossible manner. I still have a hard time believing that my clones managed to create it. However, I can finally put that plan into action." The Myriad Tetragram Seal was based on an inspiration Fujin had back when he had just graduated. It was inspired by Minato's 8 trigrams divination seal, or rather, one aspect of it. The seal Minato used to seal Kurama in Naruto allowed minute quantities of Kurama's chakra to constantly seep out of the seal and enter Naruto's body. It served a very important purpose. As the chakra continued seeping into Naruto's body, it increased Naruto's chakra reserves. Though not entirely, the chakra that seeped out eventually became a part of Naruto permanently. It wasn't like the temporary chakra that Kurama later started to give him. As such, Naruto's ridiculously high chakra reserves weren't just due to his lineage, but also due to this move of Minato. Of course, if Kurama wanted to, he could stop his chakra from leaking out. However, Minato left a perfect bait for Kurama. The more chakra seeped out of the seal, the weaker the seal became. In addition, it also allowed Kurama to influence Naruto. As such, it gave him hope of breaking free. Hence, Kurama never stopped doing so. Of course, it was a pointless hope as Minato left behind several arrangements to strengthen the seal if need be, including leaving behind his will to stop Kurama and Kushina's will to help Naruto control him. Unfortunately, Kurama was completely in the dark about these schemes. Irrespective, it was quite clear what Minato expected of his son. Fujin didn't care about the bait. What he cared about was the benefit Naruto got. However, the rate at which chakra seeped out of the 8 trigrams divination seal was too slow for Fujin. He didn't want to wait for decades for his chakra reserves to grow. Instead, he wanted it done in under a couple of years or even in months or weeks without putting himself at much risk. Hence, Fujin started working on a seal to amplify that aspect of the 8 trigrams divination seal. This was also the reason why Fujin didn't ask Hiruzen for the 8 trigrams divination seal and recreated it himself after learning the 4-symbol seal. Because, if he couldn't do that, then trying to create an even more complicated seal was a lost cause. To create this seal, Fujin had around 40 shadow clones work relentlessly for months. He barely managed to create it before the Chunin exams began. In the 1-month gap before the last round, Fujin worked on removing all its flaws and tested it on a few unfortunate rogue ninjas. Fortunately, he succeeded in the nick of time. Fujin glanced at the floating sphere and thought, "Once I'm done with the experiment on Shukaku's chakra, I'll seal Shukaku's chakra in that sphere. His chakra will be refined there and slowly become a part of me. It'll permanently increase my chakra reserves. Even though I only got 5% of Shukaku's chakra, that is still nearly twice my own chakra. Depending on how much the chakra grows further, my chakra reserves will triple or even quadruple once I'm done. Once I complete it, my chakra reserves will truly be one of the highest in the world as long as I don't consider the Jinchurikis. It'll be considerably higher than even Jiraiya's. The only one who will have higher chakra reserves than me for sure is Kisame. That guy's body is strained. Anyway, the advantage of absorbing Shukaku's chakra will go beyond just increased chakra reserves. After all, we don't have a chakra reservoir inside our body. The chakra is generated by combining physical energy and spiritual energy, so both my physique and spirit will be strengthened. It'll be a qualitative improvement and not just a quantitative one. A huge smile appeared on Fujin's face as he continued thinking of the advantages. The reason for his smile was rather simple. In front of him was a way to surpass the rank S and go beyond it. When he transmigrated to this world, Fujin wanted to become a rank S ninja to ensure his safety. However, that was just the basics. Ensuring his safety was just a basic necessity and not an ambition. Initially, Fujin didn't think much about his ambition. After all, he had just entered a dangerous new world. While he had several thoughts, he wasn't sure what he truly wanted. Hence, he decided to take it slow and figure things out on his journey to become a rank S ninja. And Fujin figured out several things. For one, he had no interest in influence and power like most other rank S ninjas. The seat of Hokage didn't interest him. If there were a seat for a king in this world, Fujin wouldn't have been interested in it either. He simply had no interest in ruling. Unlike Naruto, Jiraiya, Nagato, Hashirama, and even Madara, Fujin didn't care about peace either. Due to having experienced 2 worlds, Fujin understood that war was a part of humanity. No matter how much anyone tried to establish peace, it would be broken eventually, and humanity would war once again. Even if a utopia was created, it would eventually be taken over by leaders who weren't satisfied with it and wanted more. That was just humanity's nature. Fujin had no interest in wasting his life doing something so futile, especially when there were others who wanted to do it and fighting to realize their respective means. As such, Fujin's mind became very clear. There were only a few things he truly wanted. Chapter 756, Pursuit of Strength. As such, Fujin's mind became very clear. There were only a few things he truly wanted. One of them was to explore. Fujin wanted to explore this world. His trips with Kaito ignited this desire in him long back. He wanted to see everything that was hidden in this world, and he wanted to explore further beyond this world. Now that he had abilities that he could only dream of in his previous life, Fujin would regret it if he couldn't do it. His second ambition was his strength. Fujin wanted to be truly strong. He wanted to surpass the likes of Hashirama and Madara before reaching the level of Hagoromo and the Otsutsuki clan and surpassing them as well. Weirdly enough, there wasn't any strong motivation behind this particular ambition. He didn't seek revenge, nor did he have any noble goal which needed such strength. It was no longer about necessity either, as Fujin already had the strength to ensure his safety. While there was no doubt that having such strength would help him in several ways, like exploring beyond this world and combating the new threats he would face among other things, it wasn't the reason for this particular ambition of Fujin. It was a simple, unadulterated, and passionate pursuit of strength. Fujin wanted to see how strong a mere human could get. He wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole went. He wanted to see what bottlenecks he'd face, and he wanted to break through them. In a war-torn world, where people frequently had to grieve the loss of their loved ones which fueled their desire to gain strength, such a pure pursuit was extremely rare. That said, Fujin had another goal, for which having strength was extremely necessary. The power he needed to accomplish that goal was so high that Fujin couldn't even imagine it. Fujin wanted to understand the circumstances of his transmigration and the secrets behind it. If there was something that Fujin felt strongly about, it was this. Unfortunately, he knew how difficult that was and understood that he may never reach a level where he could understand this. Even if he died before understanding the secrets, he wouldn't care much as long as he enjoyed his journey up to that point. Regardless, those were his long-term goals. The successful creation of the myriad tetragram seal was a small but critical step in realization of those goals. Fujin gazed away from the transparent sphere and glanced at the center of the empty lake. Unlike a minute ago, it was no longer empty. Though extremely faint, a blue glow was visible. Fujin thought, while the main purpose of myriad tetragram seal is to absorb a tailed beast's chakra, it also has a secondary function. Though not as groundbreaking as the main purpose, it is still very handy. I can use this seal to store my chakra, just like how Tsunade can with the help of her strength of 100 seal. Fujin looked at the tiny amount of chakra at the center of the lake and thought, I can transfer some of my chakra here whenever I can, and I can retrieve it to strengthen myself any time I want to. So the issue of me running out of chakra will soon be history. Unfortunately, filling this lake would take a while. This lake can contain about 50 times my current chakra reserve. Even with the best quality soldier pill, it takes me 8 hours to completely recover my chakra, and I can't exactly stop training or fighting until this lake fills up. Even with Shukaku's chakra, it'll probably take me a year or two for me to fill it up completely. Of course, that's when the fun begins. Once I fill this lake up, the amount of chakra stored here will be comparable to that of a tailed beast. Though I'm not sure if I'll be able to channel as much chakra as a tailed beast can because this is an artificial chakra reserve and not my own. It would mean that I can last as long as tailed beasts in a battle. Of course, it'll be a one-time thing since I'll need a year or two to refill this lake, unlike tailed beasts who probably recover their chakra in a few hours or days. Fortunately, I have thought about that as well. A grin appeared on Fujin's face. Though the mountaintop in his inner world was rather plain except for the lake, there was one more feature. There were 16 canals on the mountaintop, each about a meter deep. They extended from the edge of the lake to the edges of the mountaintop. Fujin thought, once the lake fills up, any additional chakra I add to it will cause the lake to overflow. When that happens, my chakra will flow through these canals and trickle into the deep valleys around this mountaintop. Eventually, I want to convert the valley into a sea. Hee. While the strength of 100 seal was extremely useful for ninjas like Tsunade and Sakura, Fujin faced one critical problem. He intended to increase his chakra reserves with the help of the myriad tetragram seal. As such, the 50 times of his current chakra reserves might not be very useful for him if his chakra reserves increased considerably. However, with the excess storage in the valley, this issue was solved. Fujin couldn't even see how deep the valley was. The lake's volume wasn't even comparable to the volume of the valley. Even if Fujin's chakra reserves reached the same level as Kurama's, the valley still had sufficient space for him to create a handy artificial chakra reserve. Fujin chuckled as he shook his head. He muttered, "One step at a time. I first need to start filling up this lake, and I need to absorb Shukaku's chakra. Though I have planned as much as I can, I still need to be careful. After all, a tailed beast's chakra isn't something I can handle very lightly. I can't exactly compare myself to Naruto. He has the Uzumaki genes and is a reincarnation of Ashura. In addition, the chakra that seeped through Minato's seal was minuscule compared to what I am planning." Fujin immediately calmed himself. He took another glance at the lake and decided the formation of the army will take some time. Shikaku will probably only be done tomorrow. I'll fill this lake slightly today. Due to the chakra he received back from his shadow clone, Fujin's chakra reserves were back to full. In addition, the soldier pill he consumed the day before was still working. Fujin decided to take the day off and rest at his house. While Fujin started working on the artificial chakra reservoir, the rest of the world was about to learn a piece of shocking news. Despite such a deadly attack on Konoha, the rest of the world didn't realize it at the same time. After all, Konoha had eliminated all the spy networks of Iwagakure and Kumigakure from the Land of Fire. The two villages didn't have a single spy within the country. However, there were still some external forces in Konoha. Kirigakure wasn't as interested in the battle between Orochimaru and Fujin as their counterparts. As a result, their spy network, though damaged, still worked in Konoha. In addition, the various nobles and leaders who had gathered to watch the Chunin exam began informing their respective forces about the assault. As such, information about the assault on Konoha started spreading throughout the world. The first ones to receive the message were none other than Sunagakure. The Suna Council was already on edge, waiting for Rasa's message in the council room while ensuring that the village functioned normally. As soon as they received a scroll, an Ambu ninja quickly brought it to the council room and reported, "Baki-sama's message just arrived." He immediately handed it to Goza. As Goza opened the scroll, Tajiro urged, "Hurry up, what does it say?" Goza muttered, "Calm down, the scroll isn't going to run away." His lips suddenly stopped moving as his eyes widened. The very first sentence in the scroll said that Sunagakure suffered a complete defeat. He hurriedly read through the rest of the scroll. Seeing his expression change, the rest of the council tensed up as well. Ryusa asked, "What is it? What happened in Konoha?" Sajo asked, "Are our losses higher than our bottom line?" The more Gazo read, the grimmer his expression became, especially when he learnt that Rasa had been killed by Orochimaru. Despite his vast experience, his mind froze. For a moment, he wasn't sure what to say or do. As if on autopilot, he placed the scroll on the table and muttered, "Call the siblings here immediately." Chapter 757, Panic in Sunagakure. Call the siblings here immediately. Hearing Goza's grave tone, the Ambu ninja who had brought the scroll flickered away immediately. The remaining council members had a bad feeling. They quickly grabbed the scroll and started reading. Every last one of them was shocked to their very core. Sajo muttered in shock, "How can this be? Orochimaru betrayed us and killed Rasa. He used us like puppets." Ryusa muttered, "And only 233 ninjas are returning with Baki. We sent 858 ninjas to Konoha. He doesn't know whether the others survived or not." Ikanego added, "The status of Keisuke-sama's children is unknown too." Josuke shivered fearfully. He glanced at the other council members and questioned, "Does this mean that we not only lost our leader, but also lost over 600 of our elite ninjas and possibly our Jinchuriki?" Silence engulfed the room as no one answered him. After a few seconds, Goza let out a sigh and said, "Don't jump the gun and assume the worst-case scenario. Baki said that Gaara and his siblings escaped earlier, so they might have gotten away. It's just that we can't contact them until they return or run into Baki." Similarly, Baki estimated the death toll to be only around 300. He just doesn't know about the rest. Perhaps most of them have escaped as well. We can only hope for the best. Tajiro immediately replied, "What do you mean by the best? Keisuke-sama is dead. We lost the war. It's already the worst-case scenario." Silence engulfed the room again. Unlike others, the Suna Council was very aware of the reason for the attack. Suna's economy was in tatters. While they had never been an economic powerhouse, their situation had continuously worsened in the past decade. There were several reasons for this. For one, they experienced great losses in the Third Great Ninja War. They would have recovered with time as they did from the previous Great Wars, but there was one big issue. Due to their losses, they had to form an alliance with Konoha. While the alliance was beneficial for them initially, they realized a big issue. Due to their alliance with Konoha and the fact that the Wind Daimyo was upset with Suna's leadership, Konoha began getting most of the missions that they would have gotten otherwise. Over time, as people realized how efficient Konoha was with the missions, this trend just got worse for Suna. As a result, Suna was deprived of an opportunity to recover completely. To make matters worse, Konoha secretly made a move to destabilize the western part of the Land of Wind and painted Rasa and Suna as the bad rulers. This further increased the differences between the Wind Daimyo and the Suna leadership, while the common citizens of the Land of Wind also began viewing Suna with suspicion. Since Suna didn't have any proof against Konoha, along with the fact that Konoha had completed the missions efficiently, Suna couldn't even blame Konoha. If they did, people would have been even more suspicious. As a result, Suna needed this surprise attack to go well to turn things around. As long as their surprise attack worked, they could use Konoha's wealth to stabilize their economy. Even if they couldn't do that, an attack on Konoha would tear their alliance. As a result, the people in the Land of Wind will be forced to give the missions to Suna instead of Konoha. Of course, it'll cause a lot of discontent among the people in the Land of Wind, but there would be a huge difference compared to scrapping the alliance without attacking Konoha. Suna would have just attacked Konoha and killed Hiruzen along with hundreds of Konoha ninjas. Under such circumstances, even the Wind Daimyo would be under heavy pressure and become obedient, let alone other nobles and common citizens. No one would dare speak about their discontent or do anything about it. In addition, Konoha's losses would tempt Kumo and Iwa, forcing Konoha to deploy their forces against these two great villages. Not only would they be unable to take revenge on Suna, they would be unable to perform missions properly due to the deployment of their forces. As a result, people in the Land of Wind as well as nearby countries would be forced to turn away from Konoha and seek Suna's help. Not to mention, if Kumo and Iwa invaded Konoha, then Suna could join in to seek some benefits as well. They could also launch a full-scale invasion and annex the Land of Rivers and some parts of the Land of Fire while Konoha was busy dealing with Iwa and Kumo. Unfortunately, the reality was extremely cruel. Not only did they not win, but instead they suffered a complete loss. As the council members silently glanced at each other, they understood one thing. Sunagakure was facing their greatest existential crisis. If they didn't manage it properly, there would be just 4 great villages left. Ryusa immediately said, "We need to call our patrol units back." Goza quickly refuted, "No, that would be folly. We need to do much more. Send them orders to start laying traps, and we need to send out hundreds of squads to convert the Land of Wind into one deadly trap like we did during the previous Great Wars. Baki doesn't know what happened after he retreated. Luckily, we still have several spies in Konoha. Konoha's next step will depend on what happened in the battle between Orochimaru and the Third Hokage. If the Third Hokage lost, then we still have some hope. Otherwise, we need to prepare for an all-out attack by Konoha. An all-out attack by Konoha?" The council members immediately turned their heads and saw Ebizo and Chiyo enter the room. They quickly handed them the scroll. Just like the rest of the council members, they were stunned by its content. After a couple of minutes of silence, Ebizo muttered, "What a terrible situation." Chiyo added, "I had said back then that we don't need to ally with Konoha. They wouldn't have dared to step into the desert. However, no one listened to me. And now you trusted a snake like Orochimaru?" She shook her head in disappointment, angering several council members. Unfortunately, they could just swallow their pride due to the critical situation they were in. In Rasa's absence, they desperately needed Chiyo to step up. Luckily for them, Ebizo said, "Sister, it's pointless to complain about that. We need to deal with this situation." The council quickly created plans to prepare for Konoha's invasion. Sajo said, "The very first thing we need to ensure is that the news of Keisuke-sama's death doesn't leak out. Our ninjas will panic when they learn of our losses." However, Tajura immediately replied, "It won't work. Don't forget the Wind Daimyo also had gone to the Chunin exam. He would soon inform others in the Wind Capital, and the news will spread irrespective of what we do." Ebizo replied, "That may be true, but we should still suppress the news until we understand everything that happened in Konoha. Then we can decide how to announce it." Everyone agreed to his words and continued planning. Within a couple of hours, 700 squads were sent out of the village. They were responsible for setting traps throughout the desert to hinder any incoming army. Another 300 squads were deployed to secure important defensive positions, while 100 squads moved to the western part of the country to prevent any more misinformation campaigns from Konoha. In addition, they started creating elite ambush units. Though the people in Sunagakure were unaware of what was happening, everyone became tense. They realized that something terrible was about to happen. While the Suna ninjas were being deployed, Suna received a few more messages. They were from the Suna spies in Konoha. The council immediately got together and went through the new scrolls. Immediately, relief appeared on the faces of several council members. Ryusa said, "Even though he isn't dead, the third Hokage is injured too. So is that snake. However, we still don't know the scale of their injuries." Goza added, "Yeah, that is the important part. If the third Hokage is critically injured, then Konoha won't attack us recklessly. Even though Kumo took a lot of losses, the Reikage will jump on any opening Konoha provides them." Sajo agreed. "Yes, we need to create a communication line with Kumagakyo. If Konoha attacks us, we can draw them deep into the desert and give Kumo an opportunity to attack Konoha. That will force Konoha to abandon their attack." Suddenly, a snort was heard and everyone turned their eyes to Chiyo. Without glancing at everyone, she asked, "Aren't you forgetting something?" Chapter 758, Misunderstandings Can Be Terrifying. Aren't you forgetting something? The Suna Council members looked at Chiyo in confusion. In the last few hours, they had debated all possibilities. Yet Chiyo asked such a question. Seeing that no one had an answer, Chiyo sighed and said, "You seem to have forgotten that Orochimaru was Hiruzen's student." Her statement caused even more confusion. Ryusa asked, "What does that have to do? Why?" Ryusa's eyes widened in horror as he realized something terrifying. His expression became a sight to see. So were the expressions of other council members who finally realized what Chiyo was hinting at. Tajura muttered fearfully, "You mean that?" Sajo muttered, "How can this be? Was it all a scheme? Did we fall so badly to Konoha's ploy?" Chiyo replied, "Who can say? Perhaps only the leaders in Konoha would know. Regardless, we can't overlook the possibility of this being a trap set for us." Goza said thoughtfully, "You're right, we completely overlooked this. It is possible that Orochimaru never betrayed Konoha. Instead, it was all an act to lure and weaken us. Perhaps they sensed our restlessness and sent Orochimaru to bait us. Even though our spies reported that the third Hokage and Orochimaru were injured, they didn't see them. Both may be just faking it." Ryusa immediately questioned, "But why are they doing so? Why did they need to continue acting after killing Kazekage-sama? Even if we assume that they wanted to kill more of our ninjas, why didn't they stop pretending and chase after Baki and his forces? Wouldn't that have weakened us further? And why are they pretending to be injured right now?" Tajuro answered in a shocked tone, "It's simple. Their target isn't just us. Recently, Kumagakyo took heavy losses. Nearly 1,000 of their elite ninjas are dead or missing. If we ignore the loss of our leader, then their losses are even greater than ours. There is no doubt that Konoha was behind those events. Kumo would be filled with rage and would want revenge. By pretending to be weak, they're giving Kumo an opening that doesn't exist. Their real target isn't us but Kumagakyo. It's incredible no matter how I think about it. As expected of Konoha scums. They first killed Kazekage-sama and weakened us. Then they pretend to be weak and lure Kumo. Once Kumo falls into their trap, they'll go all out against them. With us weakened and hiding, Kiri busy in a civil war, and the Tsuchikage's nature, no one will be able to bail Kumo out." Silence engulfed the room once again. Except for Chiyo and Ebizo, everyone was in shock at how deep Konoha's plans ran. Even though it was just a speculation, everyone believed it to be the truth. After some time, Josuke wondered aloud, should we warn Kumo? He was harshly rebuked by Tajuro, and then what? Let Konoha deal with us while Kumo and Iwa just watch. The Reikage, though impulsive, isn't a fool. Konoha will have to attack us in order to tempt Kumo into attacking. Let them fight each other. Even if Kumo loses, they would cause a lot of harm to Konoha. That would be our chance to recuperate. Everyone nodded subconsciously, but Ebizo suddenly asked, "That's all well and good, but what if Kumo doesn't attack them? Are you sure our traps and ambushes would be sufficient to stop Konoha from reaching us?" Everyone turned their eyes to Ebizo. Ryusa asked, "What do you mean? Didn't we just discuss the plans?" Ebizo explained, "Yes, we did, but we didn't consider that Orochimaru could still be loyal to Konoha, nor did we have this additional information." Ebizo pointed at the scrolls sent by the spies. He continued, "By now, it is rather obvious that the one who created the chaos in the West was none other than Suzuki Fujin. And according to your speculations, the man who attacked Kumo is none other than Hideki Kakashi. As such, Konoha already has 2 ninjas who are capable of acting independently, and both of them could hunt our squads one at a time and easily cause us to lose hundreds of ninjas. Whether they do it just to increase our losses or to pave a path for their main army, we'll have a difficult time. I didn't say anything earlier as we could have still done something to stall them, but this new information makes things far more difficult for us. Suzuki Fujin has a summon that can fly. He can fly on it across our vast deserts and attack us at will. We won't even be able to spot his movements. He could also ferry elite units across the deserts and attack our critical defenses. Not to mention, he sealed the third Kazekage and fourth Kazekage by himself. Even though he had assistance from other ninjas, there is no doubt that he's strong enough to take on the fourth Kazekage by himself even in the desert. This raises the difficulty of stopping him by several levels. Just that would be troublesome, but if we also add Orochimaru into the mix, then it gets worse. He has the experience of 2 wars and is extremely troublesome on a battlefield. So are his summons. His snakes can attack from underground while Fujin attacks from the air. Along with what Hadate Kakashi did in Kumo, how certain are you that our ninjas would be able to stop the 3 of them? And I haven't even considered the Edo Tensei Jutsu. Not a single person in the room had an answer. Chiyo sighed and muttered, "So, even the desert isn't safe anymore?" Tajura immediately asked, "What about you, Elder Chiyo? Could you stop them?" Chiyo smirked and teasingly asked, "You want an old lady to go to the battlefield?" Suna's council members immediately felt awkward. Ebizo shook his head and said, "Sister won't be able to stop them either. All 3 of them are extremely fearsome and in their prime. Don't underestimate them." Tajuro muttered unwillingly, "That means that we can only count on Kumo." However, Ebizo shook his head and said, "An attack from Kumo wouldn't necessarily mean that Konoha would need to withdraw from here." Tajuro frowned and asked, "What do you mean, wouldn't they need rank S Nin?" His eyes widened as he suddenly realized. Goza gasped, "That's right, even without them, Konoha still has the 3rd Hokage and 2 Sanins. They don't need them to face a wounded Kumo." Ebizo added, "You're forgetting one person. We still don't know what Shimura Danzo, the shinobi of darkness, has been up to. His hand is definitely involved in such a scheme. That is what makes the situation even more terrifying. We need to change our strategy to account for these factors." Everyone nodded in agreement and began thinking. Sajo said, "Since they have such terrifying capability, defending important locations is rather pointless as they'll be easy pickings for them. We should only leave 1 squad in each of those places and concentrate our forces inside the village." Ryusa added, "Our ambushes will have to change too. Until we get the news of Konoha's army entering the land of wind, we should keep our ambush units hidden. That way, the 3 of them wouldn't find anyone to attack." Several other ideas were exchanged and new plans were made. Since they couldn't confront the enemy head-on, they decided to avoid combat until Konoha sent an army to their country. Of course, understanding how terrible their situation was, they also became more open to diplomatic solutions even if they had to make some compromises. While the Suna Council brainstormed to create new plans, Kirigakyo received messages from their spies in Konoha. The subordinates of the 4th Mizukage were surprised by the events but didn't pay much attention to them except for one aspect. They had their hands full with the rebels. Unlike them, the rebels paid careful attention to the news. Mei thought, "He has a flying summon, so that's why he was able to reach us so quickly." Ao said, "To think Konoha would be attacked by their former rank S ninja and an ally. Sai, alliances are too fragile. Without an alliance between them, the situation will destabilize quickly." Mei replied, "Not quite. Even though Konoha was backstabbed, it looks like they were very well prepared. Other than their Hokage, they barely had any losses. By comparison, Suna and Odo lost too much. That will intimidate anyone planning to attack them. Unless Kumo, Iwa, and Suna could ally, they won't attack Konoha. However, as you just said, alliances are too fragile." Ao replied, "That is true." He turned his gaze towards the reports and said, "Still, this boy has grown too ferocious. To think that he could take on so many strong ninjas and eliminate over 300 elite ninjas by himself." Mei smirked and said, "Yeah, he has grown to be quite a man. I hope we don't have to meet on a battlefield." Ao agreed. While several types of enemies were troublesome, the type that could cut through hundreds of elite ninjas in the blink of an eye was the most terrifying. They could take out a huge chunk of their forces and heavily restrict their movements. Mei said, "Anyway, we have an important matter at hand, the Edo Tensei Jutsu." Ao nodded, understanding what she was hinting at. "Ha ha 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 ha!" Thousands of kilometers away from the land of water, laughter broke out in a room. Chapter 759, Kumo's Target. Unlike Suna and Kiri, Iwa and Kumo didn't have any spies in Konoha. As such, they received messages about the attack a few hours after them. As soon as Anoki looked through the scroll, he broke out into a huge laughter. Kuretsuchi glanced at her father and looked into his eyes as if questioning, "Did Gramps finally go senile?" Anoki's laughter abruptly ended and he screamed in pain, "Ouch, my back! I strained it again." Kitsuchi sighed and helped Anoki out while Kuretsuchi asked, "What is in the scroll, Gramps?" Anoki replied, "It's quite amusing, take a look." Kitsuchi and Kuretsuchi read the scroll and their eyes widened in shock. Kitsuchi muttered, "So Suna finally betrayed Konoha." Kuretsuchi added, "Not just that, they were attacked by the 3rd Hokage student too. Konoha is weird." Anoki said, "Now it makes sense. Konoha should have known about Suna's betrayal and expected the attack." That is why they hit Kumo preemptively so that Kumo wouldn't be able to take advantage of their weakness. As expected of Hiruzen and Danzo. Kitsuchi nodded and asked, "Should we be taking advantage of the third Hokage state?" Anoki snorted. "Take advantage? Did you read the same report as me? They defeated Suna and Odo with minimal casualties. Even though Hiruzen is injured, they still have Jiraiya and Suzuki Fujin. Not to mention, there is no mention of Danzo and Tsunade in these reports. Konoha is still very strong." Kiritsuchi asked impatiently. "So why were you laughing?" Anoki explained. "Don't you see? In a short span, every hidden village has taken heavy casualties. Kiri is continuously taking losses due to their civil war, and their condition is worse than what it was at the end of the Third Great Ninja War. Kumagakure lost nearly 1,000 elite ninjas and their dignity a few weeks ago. And now, Suna not only lost hundreds of elites, but also their leader and the only remaining rank S ninja from their younger generation. Even though Konoha's losses are low, they should still exceed 100. More importantly, Hiruzen is an unknown state. If he dies, then that'll be splendid news, ha. Anoki calmed down and continued. "What decides the village that has the upper hand in a great war is the preparation they do in between the great wars. Our progress was derailed quite a bit. The first major blow to us was the nearly 50 Jounins who died under your command, Kitsuchi." The memories of that dreadful mission resurfaced as Kitsuchi felt a bit depressed. Anoki continued. "Later, we lost Han along with the Five Tails. I'm still not sure how he went missing and who made a move against him. One of our most promising youngsters went rogue, and we lost a huge chunk of our spies and intelligence network. As such, our preparation lagged behind quite a bit. Though we were still doing better than Kiri and Suna, we were far behind Konoha and Kumo. However, Kumo's recent losses far exceed our own. As for Suna, they have been set behind by almost a decade. Their condition might be worse than even Kiri's. And now, Konoha has taken some losses too. Hiruzen being dead or handicapped is a far bigger blow than us losing Han. We finally can rest easy and concentrate on preparing our forces for the war." The father-daughter duo was surprised by Anoki's thinking. Unlike others, Anoki didn't even entertain any thoughts of taking advantage of Konoha's momentary vulnerability. On the contrary, he was well aware that the vulnerability was just a facade. Whoever tried to take advantage of it would be burned badly. Instead, he focused on the preparations for the next great ninja war. Kiritsuchi asked curiously, "What now then? Will nothing else happen?" Anoki answered, "Everything depends on Konoha. Under normal circumstances, I would have acted impatiently. However, Konoha already ensured that he couldn't make a move. If Konoha doesn't do anything, then this matter will end here. If they invade, then it could provide an opening for Kumo to exploit. We can decide then what to do. However, I don't think Konoha would be foolish enough to do that. After all, Sunagakure suffered more than Konoha. This is already a great victory for them. They would likely engage in diplomacy. If that fails, then they would either do a symbolic retaliation with no real substance or do a few special operations to cause Suna more damage and claim a victory." Kitsuchi nodded while Kiritsuchi thought for a bit before sighing. "That is boring." Anoki sighed at his granddaughter's inexperience and began lecturing her. Kitsuchi waited until he was done before saying with a serious expression, "That said, we have an issue." Anoki suddenly became serious as well, stunning Kiritsuchi, who went quiet. Anoki said, "Orochimaru revived Master Mew and even Lord First. That snake must have disturbed their graves." Everyone had solemn expressions as they realized the gravity of the situation. Anoki muttered, "The Edo Tensei Jutsu was famous for taking intel from the dead. It foiled most of our plans during the First Great Ninja War, giving Konoha a massive advantage despite their precarious situation. Since he revived my predecessors, Orochimaru must have obtained a lot of our information. Worse, he seemed to have raised their ability to fight. He could raise an army just by stealing the DNA of our dead ninjas." Kiritsuchi's eyes widened. She thought, "That's incredible and disgusting at the same time. Even though he's a rogue ninja, Orochimaru could quickly raise a strong force with just this jutsu." Anoki thought for a bit before sighing. "There is no choice. Tighten the security around the graveyard and inspect whether their dead bodies were desecrated." He paused for a moment before continuing. "If Orochimaru can raise the dead with their strength intact, then we can't take the risk of just protecting the graveyard. We may have to cremate the dead bodies of all elite Jounins and stronger ninjas." "What did you say?" I roared in his office. Unlike Anoki, who took great pleasure, I was furious. He asked, "That snake reanimated my father." Mabui calmly replied, "That's what the scroll says." I cursed, "That damned snake! We were forced to redistribute our forces due to Konoha and Akuro, and he jumped at the opportunity. Mabui, pass orders to increase the security around the graveyard once again. We can't have any more snakes scurrying around." Mabui nodded and immediately left. Darui took another look at the scroll and said, "To think that Suna really attacked Konoha and paid such a heavy price. Their earlier request for cooperating against Konoha was genuine." I snorted. "It may have been genuine, but it was very stupid. Not only did they lose badly, but they also lost their Keizukage." C agreed. "True. This entire war feels like a scheme. From this report, it feels more like Konoha was attacking them instead of the other way around. While the Keizukage died, the Hokage and Orochimaru were only injured, and it isn't clear how injured either of them are." I nodded, but Samui asked, "However, if Orochimaru and Konoha were working together, why did they kill so many Odo ninjas? Wouldn't they be allies?" Samui's question forced everyone to think deeply. After all, why would Konoha kill over 100 allied ninjas? C's eyes widened as he said, "Maybe they were a sacrifice." Everyone looked at C as he explained. If so many Odo ninjas hadn't died, everyone would have suspected Orochimaru and Konoha to be working together. No, it would be extremely clear. However, by killing so many Odo ninjas, others wouldn't suspect them as much. I guess Konoha wasn't satisfied with just trapping Suna. They want to trap someone else. C's eyes were on Ai as he spoke the last sentence. Everyone immediately realized that Konoha may have wanted to use Ai's recklessness to lure Kumo into a trap as well. Ai's expression became dark as he said, "Of course, they want to inflict even more damage on us. They might even attack Suna to provide us with a fake opening to lure us. Doesn't matter, we won't target Konoha. Instead, focus on Orochimaru. That snake dared to desecrate my predecessors. We have the perfect excuse to go after him. Let me see what Konoha does once I kill him." I looked at C and asked, "How is the investigation in the land of rice going?" C replied, "We found a few hidden bases and have calculated several more locations. However, it is very difficult to say which is the base where Orochimaru is hiding. If we attack, it could alert him and he may either escape or lay a trap for us." I replied, "Of course, killing him won't be easy, and I can't move around easily due to Akuro. Continue monitoring the situation. We will have to kill him in one attempt." C nodded. Unlike Iwa, Kumo didn't cremate their dead. Suna did the same, but in a different way. Instead of cremating their dead, they started laying all sorts of traps within their graveyard to catch Orochimaru if he showed up again. It would soon become a forbidden area for others in Suna and the third most well-defended location among the elemental countries. On the other hand, Kiri had no confidence in defending their dead from Orochimaru in the middle of a war. Both factions made the same decision as Anoki. The minor villages were quite shocked by the developments as well. They immediately became worried about the possibility of the start of the next great ninja war. Meanwhile, the silhouettes of several terrifying ninjas appeared in a cave. Chapter 760, The Art of Diplomacy. In a dimly lit cave, several phantom bodies flickered into existence, standing atop the ominous fingers of the massive Jido statue, their forms distorted as the eyes of the Akatsuki members lay on Nagato. Hidden immediately complained, "What is it this time? Did we already capture the second Jinchuriki?" Nagato answered, "Not quite. However, there has been an interesting development." Everyone followed his gaze and looked at Zetsu. White Zetsu reported, "Konoha was attacked by Sunagakuya and Adagakuya half a day ago. It was quite a shocking battle." Sasori chuckled and said, "So they finally broke that ridiculous alliance. Took them long enough. What about Orochimaru? Did he show up too?" As his partner, Sasori was well aware of the fact that Orochimaru led Adagakuya. White Zetsu answered, "Yes, he was the main attacker. His methods were quite terrifying, as expected of a legendary Sannin. Maybe it's a good thing you didn't find him, Sasori. I'm afraid it'll take a lot more than one group to take him down." Sasori frowned, but before he could reply, Itachi asked, "So did Konoha lose?" Black Zetsu answered, "The opposite. The third Hokage is a force to reckon with despite his old age, and Konoha was prepared for their assault." Deidara complained, "Stop increasing the suspense and just tell us what happened already." White Zetsu informed the Akatsuki about the events in Konoha. Despite their aloofness and arrogance, almost all of them were shocked by what had happened. Needless to say, what shocked them most was the improvement in the Edo Tensei Jutsu. After all, if Orochimaru had reanimated a dozen dead Kage against them, they would be in extreme danger. Forget defeating him, even escaping would be a challenge. The only ones who still had confidence in facing him were Nagato, Itachi, and Hidden. Kisame muttered, "Incredible! Despite facing a dozen rank S ninja, the third Hokage still sealed them and defeated Orochimaru. How injured are they?" Black Zetsu answered, "I'm unsure. Gold and iron dust was covering the barrier in the ending stages of the battle, so it was difficult for my clones to see. I'm not even sure what jutsu the third Hokage used to seal the reanimated ninjas and defeat Orochimaru." However, he was unconscious after the battle and needed the toad sage Jiraiya and the spectral swordsman Fujin to save him from Orochimaru's subordinates. In addition, he doesn't seem to have made any public appearance yet, so it's safe to say that his injuries are serious. Orochimaru looked in a weird state as well. From what little my clones could see, his arms seemed to be paralyzed. From his rage, that injury won't be easy to heal. Zetsu's clones had kept an eye on the arena and other spots attacked by Sunagakure and Otagakure ninjas. However, they couldn't get too close. As good as they were at stealth, they would be discovered by the Hyuga ninjas if they became too active. As such, they couldn't get a good look once the 3rd and 4th Kazukages began defending the barrier. Even after the war ended, Konoha was in a state of high alert, so Zetsu's clones couldn't investigate. Hiden chuckled and said, "If both the Hokage and Orochimaru are injured, then this might be a good chance to kidnap the Jinchuriki of 9 Tails and kill Orochimaru at the same time." He was immediately refuted by Nagato, who said, "The 9-tailed beast is quite different from the other tailed beasts. The Jido statue can't absorb it right away. We'll need to seal the weaker-tailed beasts first." Conan added, "Even if we could do so, attacking Konoha at this time would be foolish. Once Konoha loses their Jinchuriki, the other villages will become wary of us and might cooperate with Konoha to eliminate us. Even though they wouldn't be able to, it's easier to operate without them pestering us. We were able to get the Jinchuriki of 5 Tails because he lived outside Iwagakure in isolation, and because we knew that Iwa would suppress this news than let others know of their weakness. The next time we make a move, we'll have to capture multiple Jinchurikis simultaneously, and before the great villages realize our motives." Hiden snorted in annoyance while a few others nodded. However, White Zetsu suddenly said, "I think you might be jumping the gun here. Even though the Hokage is injured, Konoha is still very strong. Even though they crushed Sunagakure and Otagakure, only 2 of their top ninjas went all out. While the 3rd Hokage stopped Orochimaru, Suzuki Fujin slaughtered over 300 ninjas single-handedly and suppressed Hadake Sakumo, Kaguya Shirogane, Juzo, Zabuza, Kaminari, and Haku, a ninja having Ice Keke Genkai by himself. He was the main reason why Konoha won so overwhelmingly. The Toad Sage barely fought in the battle while the last Sannin wasn't even in the village. Shimura Danzo didn't make a move either, so Konoha isn't easy to target by any means. If anything, it might be the opposite as their morale is very high due to the overwhelming victory against 2 hidden villages." Black Zetsu added, "That is correct. However, Orochimaru could be targeted. His forces were completely annihilated." Nagato nodded. He was about to speak when Itachi said, "I'll go to Konoha to investigate the situation there and take a look at the Jinchuriki." "Is he still there?" Black Zetsu answered. "Should be. Their sensors are constantly expanding their search radius outside Konoha, so my clones can't spy much for the time being." Deidara immediately complained, "Why do you get to go? I want to introduce Konoha to my art." Itachi replied without even glancing at him, "The 9 Tails Jinchuriki is my target." Deidara frowned and asked, "Isn't my target the Jinchurikis of 1 Tail? Didn't you say that he escaped from Konoha? Can I go after him?" White Zetsu replied, "Unfortunately, he has joined up with the remaining forces of Sunagakure and is accompanied by over 200 ninjas. Confronting them will attract too much attention." Deidara was about to argue when Nagato authoritatively said, "That's enough. Itachi and Kisame, you 2 go to Konoha. However, avoid attracting attention. Sasori and Deidara, you'll go to the land of rice and eliminate Orochimaru while he is injured. The meeting ends here." The phantom bodies suddenly disappeared, and each of the Akatsuki members opened their eyes. As discussed, Itachi and Kisame began moving to Konoha while Deidara and Sasori flew to the land of rice. As Akatsuki's meeting wrapped up, the council meetings took place in several minor villages. In Kusagakure, Hiroshi muttered, "It's a good thing we sent Shizuka to protect the daimyo. To think that demon would gain such disastrous abilities. He cut down 2 divisions of 100 Suna elites with just 1 jutsu each. Even Orochimaru's Edo Tensei and Keke Genkai users weren't a match for him." The Kusa Council grew cold. At the same time, they were relieved that they hadn't made any move against Fujin when he had come to negotiate. They finally realized the danger they were in. Hiroshi said seriously, "Just like Akuro, Suzuki Fujin is someone we can't afford to offend. He is no longer a mere assassin. Instead, he has become someone who can massacre armies just like the 4th Hokage. He could cause unrecoverable losses to our forces. Order our ninjas to avoid him irrespective of the situation." A council member asked, "Are you sure that just avoiding him would be enough? Don't forget that we drew weapons on him the last time we met him." His statement immediately increased the panic in the room. Though no one made a move, their nervousness was very visible. Hiroshi was slightly disappointed with his council, but he couldn't blame them. Fujin's strength had become quite scary. He thought, with the strength he displayed, there is no doubt that he'll be a Hokage candidate in the future. If he becomes the Hokage, we can't have any animosity between us. Hiroshi sighed and said, "You're right, we'll accept Konoha's offer for help." His statement surprised the council members. Several said at the same time, "But we are already winning the war and have done the main work. What's the point in taking Konoha's help now?" Hiroshi explained. "That's the point. We're giving them the full money for doing an almost completed job. Since it is a deal put forth by him, Fujin will get the credit of getting such a lucrative offer for Konoha. And since they were just attacked, they'll cherish the resources and funds even more. This will raise his stature even more, and he is smart enough to know that this was due to our decision. Though I don't think he'll ever repay this favor, he'll know that he can have an ally in us in the future." The Kyusa council members thought for a bit and agreed. Though it was costly for the village, it was way better than losing their heads. Not a single person opposed the move. Suddenly, Hiroshi's expression hardened as he continued. "That said, this move serves another important purpose. Even though the reports say that Konoha didn't take much loss, we have no idea what the numbers are. There is also a small chance that they might be bluffing. Even though we have destroyed half the forces of the rebels, their remaining forces are still quite formidable. How Konoha handles them will show us whether Konoha is still strong enough to deter Iwagakure or whether we need to make other arrangements to ensure our safety." The Kyusa Council understood what he meant immediately. After all, diplomacy was their speciality, at least when someone like Fujin wasn't sitting in the same room with a blade against their throats.